Welcome back to CN Live's continuing coverage of the 2020 U.S. presidential election. This is Joe Lauria, the editor-in-chief of Consortium News. I'm joined by my co-host Elizabeth Voss. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi there.
So, in a very dramatic day, and a day in which we might actually have a winner in this election. Donald Trump was leading about 6 hours ago by 600,000 votes in Pennsylvania. That is now narrowed to about 64,000 votes, with 98% of the vote counted. That's a dramatic change. Why did that happen? Because Donald Trump told his supporters, the Republicans, not to vote by mail. He told them to go in person. So they pretty much largely did that by about 70% in favor of Democrats on the mail-in ballots and 30 for Republicans. That means that the people who voted in person were counted first in most states, and then the mail-in votes began counting. In many states, they couldn't even begin counting, even though they had received them days and even weeks before. They couldn't start counting until the day of the election. That's Pennsylvania. So it's taking these 3 days for Pennsylvania to count the mail-in votes, because 70% of those mail-in votes, more or less, are for the Democratic candidate, Biden. He's now been eroding this lead of 600,000, now down to about 64,000. If Biden should win in the last 2% of the count, Pennsylvania, he will gain 20 electoral votes. That will add to his 253. He will be declared the winner with 273 electoral votes. However, Donald Trump has something to say about that. He, during the day, had been tweeting, stop the count, stop the fraud. Those two tweets were blocked by Twitter, but you can click view and see them. But he did worse. He went to the podium at the White House press briefing room. He didn't take any questions, and he made a statement. He said, quote, "If you count the legal votes, I easily win. If you count what he's calling the illegal votes, they're trying to steal this. If you count the votes that came in late." So, Elizabeth, he's saying that these mail-in votes, which are totally legal, which are totally part of the U.S. electoral tradition, but in this instance, because of the pandemic, there are so many more mail-in ballots. The Democrats told their voters, don't risk going out in a pandemic to vote in person, vote by mail. Trump's whole argument has been the pandemic is nothing really to be worried about very much. He's denying its seriousness from the very beginning until he played around with the scientists at the beginning. Then he just completely gave up and returned the economy open wherever he could with those Republican governments who cooperated with him, because he knew without the economic numbers going back up, he had no chance whatsoever. But that caused an explosion of cases. We had over 100,000 just on Wednesday in the United States. So the pandemic has destroyed Donald Trump's presidency, the way he handled it and the way he told his voters to vote. The mail-in are coming in, and Biden will probably declare the winner tonight, but Trump won't concede. He's suing. He wants recounts already in Wisconsin. I guess those are normal in very close elections where you could have a recount. So until Trump concedes, this thing's not over, even if Biden is declared the winner tonight. Elizabeth.
Definitely. It's been such an unprecedented election in so many ways. An unprecedented turnout, unprecedented number of obviously mail-in ballots thanks to the pandemic, and a really unprecedented, in my mind, division, like as you mentioned, between Republican and Democratic voters in the method in which they're voting. I don't think I know of any time in history when one side has used one method in person and then the other side has really used mail-in almost specifically, which then kind of plays into this accusation by Trump that, oh, this is a fake, these are fake ballots or whatever. And as we mentioned on the first night on November 3rd, we were discussing the way in which those mail-in ballots would change everything, but we just didn't know to what extent. And obviously, the vast majority of Democrats have voted via mail-in ballot, so it's not surprising that they are so, lopsided to that party. And it's definitely not surprising when you think about it that there was such a lead for Trump in many of these swing states at the beginning, because most of the Republicans did vote in person, as you say.
Yes, and Trump went even further in his remarks. He started, first of all, he blamed the pollsters for getting it wrong, and then they did get it wrong. But his interpretation of that was that it was done for, quote, suppression reasons. That there hasn't been this big blue wave, there's been a red wave for suppression reasons. In other words, he's saying that the pollsters conspired, he said, with big tech for a lot of the shutting down tweets, I think is what he was referring to, with big media, most of which has been anti-Trump, no question about it, and together with the pollsters, they all conspired to destroy his chances because if you say that Trump's going to lose, there's a 95% chance of Biden winning, then people won't come out to vote for him. This is his theory. But worse than that is he's blaming people in polling stations for doing nefarious things, that there are secret count rooms, is what he called it, that there hasn't been access to Republican observers. Now, there's no evidence of that. What happened was in Pennsylvania, he said, we sued and we got access. What actually happened in Pennsylvania was the Republicans sued to allow the observers present in the room where the count is going on to get closer to the people counting. And they won. So they were able to advance. Now, Pennsylvania challenged it, and Trump found that a big problem. Why are they challenging this? That proves that they're cheating. No, in fact, it made a big problem in terms of reconfiguring the office and desks, etc. So they had to shut things down for a while in order to adhere to this decision by the court. So he said this is going on in Detroit. That these are corrupt places. Detroit and Illinois, Philadelphia. There's sneaky things going on. Of course, these are two big black populations, Philadelphia and Detroit. So one can certainly interpret that as a racist remark as well. At least people would receive it that way, even if Trump didn't mean that. He's really, I think, talking about the Democratic machine, making allusions back to the days of the Daily Machine in Chicago or Tammany Hall in New York, where the Democrats had these corrupt operations. But Trump never makes any coherent, complete statement. The issue here for me, Elizabeth, is whether the people around him, well, there's two issues here, whether the immediate people around him, his advisors, the vice president who did not appear in the briefing room with him, his top political advisors, members of Congress, top Republicans, whether they're going to tell him, you got to stop this, because these are legitimate votes and they have to be counted. If you lose, you lose. You cannot say that I was cheated because the mail-in votes is what got me in the end. This is an extraordinary election, more mail-in votes than ever. Now, Trump may not listen to them. His family, his son, Don Jr., had a press conference apparently in which he said that we should, and he tweeted, we need to go to war to preserve this election integrity. In other words, let my father win because he was ahead before the mail-in ballots were counted. That is the dangerous part of this, Elizabeth, because his supporters believe what he says. There have been numerous places where peacefully protesting outside, I think in Arizona, where they want the votes to be counted because Trump is slightly behind. He has a chance to win. So there they want the votes counted. They don't want them counted in Pennsylvania, the mail-in votes. But many of these men have been armed in these open carry states. I think Arizona is an open carry state, if I'm not mistaken. So you can walk around with a gun while you're standing there peacefully protesting, to the point where poll workers have had to hire extra security. They fear for their lives. And when you have Donald Trump Jr. and the president himself saying that our victory is being stolen from us, this is the dangerous thing. The people around him, his advisors, Pence, McConnell, these people have to get to him and say, this is not how it's done. You can't say this is fraud. If we lost, we lost. But the people on the ground is what really could be the dangerous thing. If Trump continues to pump them up, we're at the situation that many people had feared. I wasn't so convinced, and he still might back down tomorrow, because I've seen Trump say one outrageous thing and the next day completely reverse himself over and over again during these 4 years. One example, when the pandemic was back in March and April, he said when some governors were going to lock down or do things he didn't want them to do, he said, I'm in control here. Somebody got to him and told him, you're not, that these are state issues. These are governors' decisions. Next day he tweeted, the governors are in control. So I'm hoping that tomorrow he says, okay, let's have all the ballots counted, and if I lose, I lose. But this is his life, and many people also say that he's facing prosecution in New York State, for example, once he loses the presidency. He's protected now.
All good observations. I think it's really up to Trump to decide how much he's going to listen to his advisors and his family potentially. That remains to be seen. I mean, we saw that they had a lot of trouble kind of getting a hold of him and kind of restraining, especially his Twitter use shortly after he contracted COVID and seemed to be on steroids and going on Twitter storms constantly in all capital letters for a few days there. So, I mean, maybe they'll get to him intellectually, but on social media, I think he'll still be hard to control. And again, and that does leave open the unfortunate possibility of his supporters taking their anger out on unfortunate victims who just happen to be bystanders or poll workers. I hope that doesn't happen. I think that if there is unrest, it will probably happen once we do have a final announcement of Biden winning the race. I think that's when it'll be a real danger.
I think they need to give him one of those computers that Julian Assange has in Belmarsh, where the keys are glued. That's the one they had to put in front of Trump right now. Also, you talked about him being restrained. I tweeted earlier that it may be time for the guys in the white coats to go into the house of the same color. And maybe the restraint might be something like a straitjacket. He's completely gone off the rails. The guy was never, you never had a full deck there, obviously, since going way back, since I first became aware of him as a young person in New York City. He was in the tabloids all the time with his wives and his deals and his bankruptcies. And, they loved him. He sold newspapers, and he's always been good at manipulating the media, the New York tabloid media. He would call people. There are stories where he disguised his voice and said that he was an advisor to Trump, and it was actually Trump himself, or things like that. So he's had a long relationship with the press. But the National Press Corps in Washington, the White House Press Corps, is something different than the New York tabloid crowd. And he's been so frustrated he hasn't been able to. That's one reason he's been so angry at them. Not that he was always treated fairly, as we've talked so much about Russiagate. So there are two sides to that story. But and the press often doesn't serve the interests of the people, but more of the national security state. So in that sense, they are an enemy of the people, but not to back up. But generally, he was upset with them because they were bad to him, not to the people. They were the enemy of Donald Trump, is what upset him. So it really is an incredibly dramatic, historic moment. And again, I thought, and I still think he's going to turn around tomorrow. But then there's this story by Whitney Webb, and we hope we can get Whitney on tomorrow after this update tonight to try to get some guests tomorrow when all the dust is settled, or some of the dust is settled, to talk about how the Democrats were preparing for this scenario. And it seemed very chilling at the time. Even if he won, that's the bad part. She reports, even if Trump had clearly won, they still may have mobilized some military or police way or some way to try to remove him. We'll have Whitney talk about that. Can you speak a little bit about her story before we have her on tomorrow?
Absolutely. Basically, she talked about TIP. I believe it was the Transition with Integrity Project, and it was funded by people close to Hillary Clinton. I believe there was some money from the Open Society, which is a George Soros foundation. And I think that they were doing a lot of role-playing games to see the different scenarios that could play out under different conditions, depending on how the election went. I understand from her article that John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's former campaign chief of staff, was actually playing the role of Biden in these scenarios. And that basically, as Joe said, they were, even if Trump came out clearly a winner. So let's say, for example, that those swing states had stayed red after the mail-in ballots were counted, that there would be a way that the Democrats would attempt to contest the election, and there would be pathways to victory for Biden nonetheless, which, as the article by Whitney points out, means that that really belies the Transition Integrity Project's, stated goals of simply trying to help.
Well, we did make.
a transition that is peaceful and has integrity. Obviously, they're very one-sided, they're biased, and they were basically, it seems, according to Whitney's article, trying to push one outcome of the election. And as you said, I really like to talk to her about that article, especially because it basically had the same end goal regardless of who won. That was really fascinating to me. And a very close margin like this, even if Biden does win, is still in that gray area where some of the worst case scenarios could potentially play out. She talked about unrest. She also talked a lot about artificial intelligence. So I'm sure that when Whitney does come on, she'll have a lot to talk about with the current election results that we're seeing now, especially.
Yes. Okay, I'm just watching to see if there are more news from Pennsylvania. The other thing is, what happens if he loses? And it looks pretty clear that Biden's going to take Pennsylvania tonight. Well, that's not 100% clear, but he also could just win Nevada and Arizona, which he's still ahead in. Those two states together would give him the presidency. So what happens when Biden wins? If he wins, let's still say, but if he wins and Trump refuses to leave, and he doesn't listen to Pence, he doesn't listen to Republican leaders in the Congress, he doesn't, his family, his son is on his side. Rudy Giuliani seems to be on his side, and he's talking about all this evidence. So again, I suspect that there will be recounts, there will be legal challenges. That's not unusual in a tight election like this. But what is unusual is him saying that he won already and that this was fraud and that the mail-in ballots were a fraud. He's got to stop saying that. I think they got to get him to stop saying that and just pursue the legal challenges, the recounts, and whatever that happens there. But he'd have to have various elections overturned, like Wisconsin, like Michigan, like Georgia. If he loses Georgia, though I think he's still slightly ahead there, but they're counting still in Fulton County, Atlanta area, which is more heavily Democratic than anywhere else in state of Georgia, rural areas of Georgia. So if he changes tomorrow's rhetoric to we're going to just do the legal challenge and stop saying that he won, that it was a fraud, that the mail-in ballots itself are fraud, that there's cheating going on in the counting rooms without any evidence of that, then we'll have a normal, long process maybe until he concedes. So that's the real key to me, whether he stops this inflammatory rhetoric that could lead to violence on the streets. But in that case, going back to Whitney's story, I mean, what do they do? There's been talk by a lot of Democrats, and I thought it was overwrought, frankly. Maybe it isn't now, that they have to send U.S. Marshal in to arrest him, to get him out of the White House. I mean, that sounds so bizarre to me that I just, laughed it off, and I cited Trump changing his tune 180 degrees the next day, like in that example I gave about I'm in control. The next day he said the government's in control. This might be different, though. And he may have completely lost it. And I wonder if these steroids still having some residual effect on him.
Potentially. I believe Whitney's article describes a potential where the Democrats, Biden specifically, would take over before the official inauguration would take place. I believe that was one of the outcomes. So it's really up in the air. I really do want to talk to Whitney about her article and have her expand on some of the issues she brought up. But I also want to point out that it's just in terms of Trump's kind of mental health, whether there are residual effects of steroids going on. I thought it was a very interesting interview a few years ago, at the height of Russiagate. Aaron Mate, great journalist, spoke with his father, Gabor Mate, who's a renowned psychologist. And Gabor Mate was basically discussing the fact that, in his opinion, Trump is someone who has, not only narcissistic personality, but also that it results probably from trauma growing up with his father. Obviously, Trump's brother had alcoholism, which led to his early death. So it's a really interesting character study as well. It's a shame that it has to be the president of the United States. But
well, I mean, most people have some degree of trauma growing up, some worse than others. And part of the process of becoming a mature person is to deal with it. And if you can't, you get help. Now, Trump, I don't think that he acknowledges this. Maybe to himself, but he never would publicly. You talked about changing the inauguration. They can't change the inauguration date to put Biden in. That's in the Constitution. So it would have to be some constitutional amendments. What could happen is two inaugurations, where you have one, Biden on the Capitol and Trump maybe at the Trump Tower, in New York being inaugurated. And, it's not that unusual. We've got two presidents in Venezuela right now, don't we? It's happened before where after an election, there have been both parties claim victory and two people, and that often led to bloodshed. It hasn't in Venezuela because the John Bolton's crowd is screwed up so badly again, like another Bay of Pigs, where that attempt to go in there and kidnap Nicolas Maduro, it seemed like, failed, and he has such little support, Juan Guaido, except from the U.S. and its allies, but not the people. But here in the U.S., there are people strongly supporting both sides. This is the largest turnout, maybe in U.S. history, by the way, and I think the mail-in ballots had a lot to do with that. And I would not be surprised, even if the pandemic is over, and we all hope that it is in 2024, that mail-in voting becomes something normalized here, and that states change the rules so that they could start counting when they arrive and hold the results in abeyance, obviously, not announce them, so that when the day of actual, so that those are counted, and only those that come in postmarked November 3rd, but come in Pennsylvania's case, up to 3 days afterward, as long as it's postmarked November 3rd, they will accept that. So that would minimize this situation where you allow Trump to say, I won, and now I'm getting cheated out of it. But if these votes had been counted earlier, the mail-in ballots, he could never have said that because he would not have had the big lead, like the 600,000 vote lead in Pennsylvania that is now whittled down to about maybe 50,000. So I'm hoping that mail-in ballot voting becomes, it's also for older people. And this is why the Republicans don't like it too. I think this goes beyond Trump. We had Greg Palast on. Republicans want to suppress the vote, particularly of African Americans and Asian Americans, poor people who vote for Trump or vote Republican rather. They know, the Democrats know. I think Trump once said that if there's a big turnout, the Democrats win. So the Republicans have to try to prevent a big turnout, and mail-in voting is something that undercuts that Republican strategy. You can't very easily suppress a vote by not allowing people to buy postage. In fact, these are postage paid envelopes, apparently. You don't even need a postage stamp. So what did he do, though, by the way? It was a bit, Trump said that where these mail-in ballots are going to be fraud, and then they tried to prevent the post office from being funded, remember? To make it harder for this to work. There was such an outcry that they stopped that. So Trump's had this strategy all along, and he's following through on it. So that shouldn't be surprising, although it's still a little shocking to hear him say these things. But look, he's going to have to give up at some point. He's a completely acting like a lunatic now, but I think that there's even a limit to his lunacy.
I think he will not give up until the courts finally reject him. That's when he'll give up, I think. I don't think he'll, until if there is even the slimmest legal possibility of the result being overturned, he'll keep fighting for it. I think that it's a good thing that people have been confident in mailing in their votes, but I also think that it's great that people have taken advantage of early voting. I think it negates some of that unfairness, a little portion of that unfairness when it comes to people having to take the day off work mostly to go to the vote, and standing all day especially in urban communities in line for hours and hours, as Greg Palast talked to us a few nights ago. I think that the fact that more people were taking advantage of both early voting and mail-in ballots was a very positive development. And I do think that's one of the big reasons that you have such a huge turnout this year, that people were really thinking about it beforehand. And I think that most, maybe hundreds of thousands of those people, if it had been, without the COVID issue, may have either forgotten, not been able to take time off, or for other reasons, not been able to participate. So that's a good thing. And I do hope that continues into the next election.
Yeah, well, two things. Trump also said in his White House remarks today that he thinks this is going to go to the highest court, the Supreme Court. So, what you just said, he's going to let the legal processes work out, which is perfectly fine. And he's still president, and Biden will not be inaugurated till January 20th. And this is not unusual to have legal challenges. The problem is if he loses in Wisconsin a recount, or he loses in Pennsylvania, or wherever he's suing. It seems like in every swing state that he lost, maybe he's filing some kind of lawsuit. If he loses in all of those, or at least some, Will they escalate that to the Supreme Court? Will the Supreme Court accept this? He's counting on another part of the strategy was, try to discourage people from voting by mail, which was stupid because only his own people didn't vote by mail. Where the Democrats were saying to vote by mail, so their followers voted by mail. And the other thing was to get the Supreme Court a nomination of Amy Coney Barrett through. They rammed it through in complete hypocrisy because they'd prevented Obama with at least 9 months before there were, or more before that election. They said it's too close to an election, can't do it. But this was 2 weeks basically before an election. And they rammed it through because they have the Senate majority. And Barrett makes it a 6-3 conservative court. But Trump can't necessarily depend on the court going with him. This is what he's banking on, but is that if we have a 6-3 majority and we can get this election to the Supreme Court, they'll overturn. He's looking back to Florida 2000. And what happened in Florida 2000, I don't think I fully explained that the other day. The state Supreme Court, this is where this has to play out, in the state Supreme Court. The state Supreme Court first. The state Supreme Court would have to rule against Trump here, and then Trump wants to escalate it to the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, and they may or may not take the case. They may or may not vote for him. In Florida, the state Supreme Court voted to have a total recount of the entire state, in opposition to Al Gore, who only wanted certain districts recounted, and he made a mistake there. He should have agreed to that. But in any case, Supreme Court, despite Gore's bad decision, did order that. The Republicans then appealed that decision to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court, a 5-4 majority conservative, voted to accept the petition by the Republicans, meaning it vacated the state Supreme Court's decision to have a statewide recount, and the election was over. That's how Bush won. So they intervened by shutting down the state Supreme Court. This is what Trump would want to do again. Whatever decisions the state Supreme Court made, to have that reversed by the U.S. Supreme Court. I won't be surprised, especially if he's got Giuliani, maybe other lawyers there pushing for that we could get the Supreme Court. And then it would come down to whether they have integrity or not. Because this is such an open and shut case. It's not as complicated as the hanging chads and the spoiled ballots and the butterfly ballot and all that. This is a matter of whether mail-in ballots are legal or not, and whether they can muster any evidence to show that there was any kind of fraudulent activity in regard to those mail-in ballots. And so far, there's not a shred of that evidence.
Yeah, the only questionable thing that I saw was on the night of November 3rd, when we were watching the tallies come in. And this could have been just an issue with the map or the AP's reporting of the results. It may not be a result irregularity. But in Virginia, I did see areas that were 80% and over for Trump were being labeled blue. And I think it corrected itself by the end of the night. And I took some screenshots of it because it was bizarre. But there were small things like that were very odd to me. But I assume that that's an issue with the website or with AP's reporting temporarily in the confusion. And then the other thing that I've seen, just to give kind of the I guess some of the Trump supporters' views, just to air them. I think that I've seen some people saying that Joe Jorgensen's results actually went down in certain areas. I'd have to make sure that that's factually correct. But there have been lots of questions about results in that sense. I think that in hindsight, give it a few weeks, go through the recounts, and everything should be sorted out by then. I don't think you can hide the real results from recounts, and definitely not in the court process that will take place, regardless of any irregularities in specific areas.
Yeah, Virginia was always going to be a blue state. And for the fact that Biden won it, they're not even talking about Virginia, Trump. It's talking about.
Absolutely. And I'm not saying that it would have gone red or anything like that. It's just that initially it had been marked blue when it was very much going to Trump. And I was just like, why would you do that? But I guess it's because they assumed by the end of the night it would turn blue, essentially.
Yeah, it was a screw up, maybe. Yeah, that's really not an issue, Virginia. But Pennsylvania is bound to be one. Wisconsin is one. I think Michigan. Anywhere where Biden wins by 1% or less. In fact, I think Wisconsin is an automatically triggered count if it's 0.5 or less of a difference, half a percentage point. If you win by half a percentage point, it's an automatic recount. You don't even have to ask for it. But in other states, you can ask for it, and I think they're going to do what they can and I think he needs time to simmer down, and be talked to. But the guy is desperate, and he really is out of control and unpredictable. We've always known that, but this he's making he's really making a spectacle of himself in a historic situation. I mean, I'm a little bit fed up with the rhetoric of CNN because they are, Wolf Blitz seems like the only old reporter who has some kind of objectivity, but even he's has to weigh in. They all say the same thing. They're all lecturing and giving. We see what's going on. Don't overkill. It's really disturbing that the way they talk about this because that's not what I think reporting should be about. I was going to make another point, and maybe I'll remember it, but
that brings up an important point. And that important point is, what is the media going to cover? How is it going to get its clicks and views and viewership when Trump's out of office? Obviously,
yeah.
in the case that Trump leaves, I mean, they're going to have a huge dearth. I mean, they've trumped up so much hysteria over his administration that it's going to be a huge void for them. So maybe they're trying to, maybe even subconsciously, they're trying to rake in the last little bit of hysteria they can drum up until he's gone out of office.
Well, don't forget how they covered his campaign in 2016. Blanket coverage. And I think one of the network leaders said it's great for the bottom line. Donald Trump. They milked him for everything, and they helped him win because of all the coverage he got. They elevated him from someone who was a novice and who was known, but nobody gave him a chance to win. To suddenly, even the Pied Piper, the Democrats wanted Trump because they thought it'd be easier to beat. And then the networks pumped him up, and he tapped into this anger in the country that Democratic and Republican administrations have created over the last 30 years with the neoliberal economic policies instituted under Reagan and Britain Thatcher that have devastated the middle class. So why should they be surprised if some guy who is a very good demagogue, really, he could really rile up people. In fact, in his remarks today, he said this all proves, because of this conspiracy of big media, big tech, and social media, big tech, and the pollsters, that the Democrats are the party of Wall Street. He said this, and we are the party of workers and farmers. And he's calling Biden a socialist. Now he's the worker and farmer party, right? This was the traditional base of the socialist. So it's just.
I do think that's who he's trying to appeal to as his base. The Rust Belt, especially in Rust Belt states, the farmers, working class people who have felt completely and utterly abandoned by the Democratic Party. So I do think that's very intentional that he's invoking those groups of people.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
No question.
But who created that condition? The Democrats helped create that condition. Under Bill Clinton, severing the ties to the labor unions, its traditional base, moving closer to Wall Street, taking on centrist positions. Biden with his crime bill, his bankruptcy bill, backing the war, the invasion of Iraq, the militarist policies that became bipartisan more and more. The Democrats had no anti-war sentiment anymore at all in the established centrist Democrats. Where Trump talked about ending endless wars, right? No more intervention. That took in. We debated that for months, whether or not, or years, whether he really was a libertarian who could have very, in my opinion, conservative, even regressive views domestically, but on foreign policy, they often join together with progressives in being non-interventionists. So was Trump being a libertarian non-interventionist? Or was he just being a showman that he is, and knowing with his advisors, with Cambridge Analytica helping him, coming up with nicknames like Crooked Hillary fame, and other good advisors, Bannon, who, by the way, I'm going to tell you about Bannon, you probably know this, Bannon and those saying, this is what you got to do. Tell the working class we're going to bring those jobs back that Democratic and Republican administration shipped overseas. We're going to end these wars that are disproportionately affecting working class people and families. And we're going to restore the pride in America that the Democrats destroyed. Now, Steve Bannon, you may have seen, Elizabeth has been kicked off YouTube and Twitter today. And you know why?
Tell me, Joe. I was out of internet service for many hours today.
Yeah, which we could tell our viewers is why you're in a different setting right now.
Yes.
When we're so happy to be able to come on. And that's why we started a little bit late as well. Well, I also got here late. I'll be honest. I'm going to be full disclosure. Um, Bannon on his webcast said that Christopher Wray, the FBI director, and I can't remember the other one now. I'm sorry. Another top official should be fired immediately in the next Trump administration. And he said he's echoing Trump that he won, it was stolen. The same. He's echoing all that stuff that Trump said. It's not just Trump. And that he goes, well, no, I'm going to go further. I'm going to go back to days of two to England, and their heads should be put on the spikes outside the White House. The head of Christopher Wray and this other official should be put on the pikes. So Twitter's reporting, people are saying that he's calling for their beheading. And based on Bannon calling for the beheading of the sitting FBI director, whose head should be put on a spike outside the White House as a warning to other civil servants and other federal officials, he's been banned, which is, look, he won't be able to amplify Trump's calling this a fraud. Bannon was such a key figure in that election of Trump the first time around, even though he had to leave. And now he's been indicted himself for fraud. He's out on bail and calling for the beheading of officials. God, can't make this stuff up, can you?
No, really. And although I abhor any call to violence on any party towards anyone, I do think that big tech is actually playing into their hands by making them look like victims in censoring them. I also think that, we saw Kathy Griffin hold up a figurine of Trump's head having been beheaded, and to my knowledge, she wasn't censored. I don't think she should have been censored, and I kind of stand on the side of don't censor anybody, just counter people's speech. However, that doesn't mean I'm a fan of that speech. Whether calling for violence is wrong, no matter what side you're on, in my opinion.
I totally had forgotten about that. That comedian, what was her name again?
Kathy Griffin.
Yeah, right. Holding up that was shocking.
Yeah, early 2017, right after the inauguration, I think.
I know. And that, as you say, she wasn't censored for that. That just, that backfired because that just riled up his base even more, right? And made people feel like, well, that's a little too far. I think she was condemned by even some liberal commentators because that was too far. I think CNN fired her, didn't they? Or was it ABC? She did the New Year's Eve. I think it was CNN. She did the New Year's Eve reporting, and she was fired from that for doing that, which was, but Bannon has got his heads on a pike now. This kind of rhetoric and with men walking around with guns, and this is where Trump's really his biggest responsibility is to back off from inflaming them and say we're going to do a legal process now and let's leave it. And then if he loses, he's got to accept that. And there's talk that he would come back for a 2024 election. You know that?
That's definitely a possibility. I think that likewise, if Hillary Clinton wanted to come back in 2024, we could see that as well. I don't know that it's likely, but we could have another Trump-Hillary, election potentially.
No, I think Harris will be if Biden wins, she's most likely to be the nominee. I think Hillary would be hard to beat her in a primary after 4 years as vice president. Hillary being older and out of the game for 4 more years, unless she's on the Supreme Court, like we was speculating. There was an interesting article on, I think, Axios, the Daily Email, that McConnell's already going around saying, the head of the Senate Majority Leader, going around saying that Biden is not going to be able to get his cabinet that he wants because the Senate has to confirm most of the cabinet positions, except the cabinet positions. The National Security Advisor, I guess, is not a cabinet position because they don't have to be confirmed. And that, like, Susan Rice can kiss the State Department away, and I was talking about her being a possible Secretary of State. So right away, what we talked about before, Elizabeth, about how deluded Sanders and his followers, any of them who believed him, think that once Biden gets in, we're going to help him get in, then we're going to push him to the left. That was a delusion. We see even now it's even more of a delusion because the Republicans will hold the Senate, it looks like, and they will be able to not confirm certain nominees for cabinet, which weren't going to be socialists anyway, right? Like
Absolutely.
Bernie wasn't getting to be a labor secretary or something like that. Elizabeth Warren was not going to be Treasury Secretary. Wall Street doesn't want it. But even if he wanted to, now the Republicans could stop it. So he's already compromised if you don't have control of the Senate. But he wasn't going down that road anyway, Biden. He's not going to give a job to Elizabeth Warren. He didn't give her the vice presidency, for example, as many people thought that he might.
Despite the fact that Kamala Harris openly called him a racist in one of the, I think, the first debate or one of the very early debates.
Yep.
Still we see her coming on, and that speaks yet again, as you say, and as we've talked about, to the fact that both of these candidates, Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, they both serve the money interest, and that's what unites them as partners on their ticket. It's very clear, and that's exactly what I expect to see with any cabinet picks. And honestly, from what I understand, Joe Biden was looking into Republicans anyway. So even without the Senate being held by the Republicans, I think that he's on the verge of being a Republican himself. So I don't think there's a chance, not a single, even slight chance, that the progressives will have the leverage to push or pull him left. None. If anything, he'll go further to the right once in office.
Well, he is a right winger. He's a center right. That's Hillary is. I mean, let's face it, on domestic and foreign, especially on foreign policy, there's a bipartisan agreement about American aggression. Let's face it, and promoting this myth of us being the great beacon and the spread of democracy. We have no economic or strategic interest in the world. In the Democratic Party, I think Elizabeth, in the age of Trump, has taken on so many of the ugly things that they are themselves fighting against. Yeah, they are. I think they are so certain that they were right, and that because Trump is so bad, I agree, obviously, that they became so self righteous that they can't look in the mirror and see how authoritarian liberals have become. And Russiagate really did expose that, and the way the media and these censorships that they were able to force the social media companies from going into. Just looking at CNN here to see if we have some updates. I'm sorry, go on.
I was just going to echo what you said. I think that Russiagate, and especially the 2016 WikiLeaks publications, revealed the way that the media has been very much on the side of the Democratic Party, working with them actively, potentially elevating Trump, especially in the beginning, as a Pied Piper preferred candidate to face off against the Democrats. But they have a bipartisan interest as well. This is not simply and only the media on the side of the Democrats. It's on the side of the establishment, the intelligence community, the war interests, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And unfortunately, it does set up a dynamic where, because Trump, at least in principle, is from outside the Beltway. I mean, obviously, he's a billionaire. He's part of the 1%. He's not outside that kind of establishment, but he has the appearance of being outside the political establishment. And the Russiagate and all of the rest of the false accusations against him that were focused on by the media really reinforced that sense that the public had, that he was an outsider candidate, that the establishment was against him, so therefore he must be against what the establishment is for, whether that's corruption, war, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, his tax cuts and other policies he enacted did not reflect that reality, because it isn't really true, but the media has done a lot, whether it's censorship, Russiagate, or a multitude of other things, to make it seem as if he is this outsider maverick. And so I can see why a lot of his supporters would have kind of gathered around that. Like, they know that the media lies to them. So when Trump says the lying mainstream media, they raise their fist and go, yes, you're speaking truth. They don't look at his the way in which he has, done $100 billion weapons deals with Saudi Arabia. They don't look at some of the stuff that he's done that has been in lockstep with the establishment. And so it's been a dance between Trump and the mainstream media that has really it's encouraged, entrenched, and strengthened their own base, whether it's the MSNBC watching, CNN watching base that's believed in Russiagate, or whether it's the people who believe that the establishment is lying to them at every turn. Both bases have been really encouraged through this whole thing. So as I mentioned earlier, it'll be really interesting to see what the media does in the wake of not having Trump anymore to kind of stand up against. How are they going to define themselves? Is it going to be just going back to sleep under Joe Biden? If so, they're going to lose a lot of viewership. So it'll be interesting to see what they turn to next.
Well, I don't. I think one has to consider when Trump says the media is lying, and the people believe him, that he's lying too. They could both be lying, the media and Trump, obviously.
Exactly.
But some new numbers in here. Trump now leads in Pennsylvania by 42,142 votes, and Wednesday morning he had a 600,000 vote lead. So it is whittled down to 42,000 votes. They're still counting them. They're giving in batches. In Georgia, his lead has gone down to 1,902. So that is the trend, as these ballots that were mailed in are continue to be counted, and they're in the 70% range for Biden. Trump's picking up some, but in every batch that comes in, he's losing substantial leads here. Again, Pennsylvania is what we have our eyes on. Earlier in the day, the Democratic or the Biden camp had said they did not expect a winner today. Nevada, which people had expected to report around noon their time. On Thursday, now it came out, and their Secretary of State, one of their officials, said that it's going to be on the weekend. So forget about Nevada. Then suddenly Pennsylvania started ramping up, where the Secretary of State of Pennsylvania went on CNN and said, we expect the majority of the votes to be counted today, Thursday. And that's why the focus has been now on Pennsylvania, with its 20 electoral college votes. That would give Biden 273. You need 270 to win. And he'll declare victory when that happens. Trump's going to say it was stolen, and we're going to go to the courts, and we're going to have the courts play out. It's whether the rhetoric from Trump stirs up people on the streets. There's been already disturbances throughout the country, including in New York City on Wednesday night. Many arrests and clashes with the police. Anti-Trump protesters clashed with the police. Notice I didn't say Biden supporters. I said anti-Trump protesters, because I think that's still the main reason a lot of people voted for Biden, was because they're really voting against Trump. And I want to make this point about the pandemic. That is what, in the end of the day, is going to write the obituary, the political obituary of Donald Trump. And almost wrote his literal obituary, because he got the disease. But his political obituary will say that he was cruising with a very good economic numbers, including employment, certainly the stock market, and that he was going to run on that. And he had, even though he's a braggart, he's a boastful, the most boastful person I've ever seen in public life, that I've run the greatest economy in the history of the United States, blah, blah, blah. He had some numbers to back that up. The pandemic came. He listened at the beginning somewhat to the scientists who used to appear at those daily briefings. Fauci, sorry, that's the one who Bannon wanted, whose head he wanted on the pike. Ray, the FBI director, and Fauci. Yeah, just remember that. That's who Bannon wants beheaded, Fauci and Ray. But Trump listened to them at the beginning more or less, and he allowed, New York started locking things down, and he may have disagreed, but he helped. He sent that ship there. He sent PPE, whatever he could. There was a lot of problems between the government trying to sell PPE to the highest bidder, a lot of chicanery going on. So Trump was never fully on board with taking a scientific and serious approach to this virus. But then when he saw what happened to the economy, he had to turn around. And I don't agree with what Kim.com said the other day, that he had no choice, that he had to sacrifice lives to save the economy. I think economic pain is one thing. The pain and suffering you go through and possible death from COVID-19, I think, is another. But Trump made that cold, calculated, sociopathic, in my view, decision to encourage governors in the state to open up. And, there's a lot of his supporters don't want to wear masks because they seem to look like wimps. It became early on. I remember Scott Horton, who lives in Austin, Texas, on anti-war radio, was telling me how they're fighting each other about who wears it. Democrats will wear a mask, Republicans wouldn't. Men didn't want to wear a mask because it seemed like they were somehow weak. This is part of so Trump then went the other way and opened up and downplayed even more the virus than he did at the beginning. And guess what? He then said, don't mail in your votes. Because that would give in to what he thinks is a democratic narrative, which is, in my view, really the scientific one, that you got to wear masks, you have to social distance, you may have to shut down parts of the economy in order to stop the spread of this damn thing. So he said, don't go to don't mail your votes in. And this is what's coming back to destroy him. So he lost votes because the way he handled the virus. I think a lot of people deserted him because of that. It was so bad. And because he told his voters, because of the virus, not to mail in their ballots.
Yeah, I think that in the beginning it seemed like, and from what we understand from what he said in private, it sounds like he was very concerned with not giving the appearance of it being kind of emergency that it turns out that it was. I think that he wanted to minimize the effect of it in order to keep his own the public perception of him strong, to keep his own image relatively strong in the face of the pandemic. Obviously, he was forced to abandon that eventually, but I think that it was a huge political miscalculation on his part, but very predictable in terms of his personality. And we do have a couple of questions in the chat. One of them is, what is the chance of Kamala choosing Tulsi as foreign policy? I believe foreign policy advisor is the word that was intended to end that question. And I would say very briefly, it's easy to answer that. Absolutely nil. No chance.
No, I disagree with you. I think it's minus 10.
Minus 10.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'll have to defer to your estimate. Yeah. And so the other question we have is, aren't you concerned about Biden losing his marbles? And so I think, and I've answered in chat very briefly, that we did discuss Biden's cognitive decline yesterday, I believe. But I mean, it is a concern. And I think that, but ultimately, as we know, just as we've seen in other presidencies, the president themselves are not the ultimate power behind the throne. There are other people, there are advisors, even family members that have in previous administrations stepped in. However, as we noted in our previous discussion about this, there's never been a president, to our knowledge, that has gone into the White House with this kind of cognitive deficit. But, because the president is, especially a Biden presidency, would be so at the mercy of handlers and other interests that he would represent, I doubt that it will have a really substantive effect on the presidency. And there would be other people really ruling it in every respect except name.
Look, Donald, at least Joe Biden had marbles. I don't think Trump ever had any.
Corrupt ones, but yes.
Now Biden has certainly lost a few. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And what the question is, I don't know how many he has left, or how many he had to begin with. So it's a damning situation where you have these two men who are having real mental issues, being the two candidates. I don't know what to say about that, except that what you said is probably correct. That this is an elite performance art, basically. There are factions who want power, and they're fighting one another. And their policy differences are minimal on the whole. There are some, certainly, mostly domestic side, not foreign policy. So they're fighting one another. And as I say, they drag the rest of all of us into this intra-ruling class fight every 4 years. All of a sudden, they pay attention to us, or they say they do, and they make promises, and they listen, except when it comes to really important things like national health insurance, Medicare for all, ending these wars. Then they're not even going to listen to that, because that is not in the interest of power brokers who are basically choosing these two candidates, especially when the candidate doesn't have all that much money and who can't run on his own money like Trump did initially. So yes, there is a power establishment that's hidden in the shadows. That's Wall Street has its influence. Defense contracts have an influence. They're not necessarily coordinating it, but they have their lobbies. both of the White House and of Congress. Israel has its lobby. Israel doesn't control American foreign policy. It has a huge influence on Middle East policy of the U.S. clearly. So all the various lobbies, Pharma has their lobby, so that the communications companies and social media have their lobbies. So these big, powerful interests have enormous control, almost even more than influence, on government because of the money that they shake out, that they bestow on more and more expensive campaigns, which enrich the networks and the newspapers who cover, at least when they had ads in newspapers, but certainly TV ads. This is that powerful blob, as Barack Obama described it. So it was not a conspiracy theory. Even Barack Obama knew it existed. This foreign policy establishment has really the ultimate. They have their marbles. Maybe unfortunately, they are in possession of their marbles. They know what their interests are. It's not the interests of the vast American people, except those who work for them. And it's certainly not the interests of countries that are on the receiving end of Raytheon and Boeings and the other missiles and bombers and the killing machine of the US that is palmed off through the media as a democratic force and a force for good. And this is the biggest lie of all, the most dangerous one, that the American people do, and by and large, somehow believe this. I don't know what percentage is, and there's plenty of anti-war sentiment that's not expressed, I think. And I think Trump tapped into that. There was a poll right after the 2016 election which showed those districts where people had family members in Iraq or in Afghanistan, that there was a larger in exit polling. They were pretty much anti-war, and they thought Trump was going to deliver that. And he hadn't started a new war, but he carried on Barry's wars, started by George, and the drone wars essentially. And he didn't really have a major invasion. I wonder what would happen with Biden. That worries me.
That's a huge question. I do think that in the 2016 election with Hillary Clinton, you really did. She had discussed no-fly zones over Syria. There was a real concern that she would be extremely hawkish coming into the White House. So I do think that was a big factor in 2016. Biden is a little different, but he's still hawkish. He was still heavily involved with the Iraq narrative of WMDs and supporting that. I don't think that he would be. I don't know whether he would be on the level of Clinton in that sense, but he definitely is not. He's not anti-war by any stretch, and I do think that plays a little bit into Trump's base. I do think that they perceive him as an anti-war president. I think that they see him as attempting to get out of Syria and then being kind of forced to stay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that that's a really important subject that not a lot of people want to talk about. And additionally, I think that it's really it's very much it's disempowering when people do realize that you've got two bad choices. And that was kind of the subtitle of our coverage of this. It's this terrible choice. When you really understand that it's a no-win choice, and neither candidate is going to represent you, as you're discussing, where it is these lobbyists and these corporate and military interests that have so much influence, then you kind of do become disengaged a little bit from the outcome, because you know that either way, your interests are not going to be represented. And that leaves us with a question of, in the independent media, we can keep covering skeptically whatever administration comes into power, whatever corrupt move that it makes, and all of that going forward. But what is and this is something I've asked basically all of our guests, but really, what can the public do once they have that realization that the government that is elected, no matter what color it's under, no matter what president it's under, when they realize that administration is not going to represent their interests, and neither will Congress, the Senate won't represent their interests, and on it goes. What does that leave us with? Does that leave us with the kind of unrest that we've seen over the summer, especially in the wake of COVID and the public not getting the help that it needed? Is that where we're headed? And does that lead to anything good? Does that lead to real change, or does that lead to a more repressive police state? I mean, it's some hard questions that we're going to be struggling with in the years to come, no matter who wins.
Well, Biden answered the question already. He said there won't be any change. He said the things would stay the same under him. Maybe that was a lucid moment, one that his campaign people regretted he said, but he did say that. And I think he's honest.
In that moment. Yeah.
We know what Biden is. He's been around for 50 years. I was just looking it up. He won his first election in 1969 on the city council, county council, I think in Newcastle County, Delaware. And within 3 years, he was a U.S. senator from Delaware, which is extraordinary. He was 27 years old when he went in the Senate. He served with Mike Gravel. Okay, he served with Mike Gravel. So throughout 7 years in the 70s. And Mike's 99 years old now. Oh, 99. He's 90 years old. Sorry, Mike, if you're watching. And he's still going strong. I think he's got more marbles than Biden does, frankly. Wouldn't you agree, Mike Gravel?
Oh, definitely. Maybe more marbles than Biden and Trump put together.
Probably, but yeah, that's not saying very much, is it? But Harris, we got to look at Harris again in terms of foreign policy. I think this is an incredibly ambitious and opportunistic woman who is in love with herself, and she has this whole coterie of supporters based mostly on identity politics. And sure, it's great to have a woman and a black woman to be president, black and Asian Indian American woman. But what kind of policies is she going to have? So, given her prosecution record, I wonder how she would prosecute wars, whether she would be warlike. Now, you mentioned Hillary wanting that no-fly zone. Joseph Dunford, the general who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified during the campaign, was around September of 2016, that a no-fly zone could lead to war with Russia. And he said, I don't make the policy, I'm just telling you what I think. And a couple of weeks after that, there was the final debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. She continued to call for the no-fly zone after the top general said it could lead to war with Russia.
I was concerned about World War III breaking out if she won at the time. I was very concerned about that. I expected her to win, but I was very concerned about the probability or the possibility of a war with Russia if she did.
Now, Harris is young relatively, right? She's in her 50s.
I believe so.
Or 50, or I'm not quite sure how old she is, but so people could get in her ear, like Hillary Clinton maybe, or I should say Supreme Court Justice Hillary Clinton, when they're having tea somewhere in Washington. No, I mean, she would. We don't know what she'd do on foreign policy. She's obviously very pro-Israel, but they all are. They're not going to be helping the Palestinians out anytime soon. On Iran is the only thing, and we had Giorgio the other day, I guess it was yesterday, talk about the two foreign Middle East policies of the two candidates. And the only real daylight there is Iran, that maybe Biden would want to go back to the nuclear deal, and I hope he would, and then lift the sanctions again if they could work it out. So she might go along with that. Harris, she's an open book. She's such a chameleon when it comes to, she takes the right position when it's necessary. There was somebody who challenged her where she about the when she went after Biden in that debate because he backed busing, he opposed busing, and he was buddy with segregationists in Congress. And she said, I was one of the little girls that was on that bus, right? And she really devastated him on that. And then she's the vice presidential candidate. And on one of these video interviews, I think it was it may have been one of the late night show hosts on her show, but it was on Zoom because of the pandemic. It was Colbert. I think it was Colbert or the other guy from NBC. I'm forgetting who that is. Who has the NBC Tonight Show now? What's his name?
Oh, good Lord. I don't have cable. I don't watch it.
That's on over the air. So anyway.
But I don't watch those channels anymore.
I was going to say Jay Leno. It's not Jay Leno. It's not Johnny Carson. But and I'm sure a lot of people in chat are going to tell you right now who it is.
Fallon, maybe. I think. Well, and I remember that she reversed her policy on busing. I believe that she said.
No. He just asked her, well, what was that all about? He showed the clip, I think.
Right.
Now all of a sudden you're his VP, and she said it was a debate. It was a debate.
So but there was video of her contradicting herself on that issue afterward. So chameleon is an understatement. And from what I've seen of her, just on a personal gut level of praising her throughout the debates, throughout the nomination process, and in her interviews and that kind of thing, I think that she actually does strike me as very similar to Hillary Clinton in her personality, and I would not, I wouldn't be surprised if she would be very warlike too. I mean, that's just the sense that I get. It's obviously not based on anything factual, but that's my take on that.
Yeah. Well, there's a message here from Kathy, the producer. It was a Democratic governor in Nevada, huh? So you could expect him to criticize Trump about the election being stolen from him. And Nevada, of course, is one of the states where the counting is going on, where there's a lot of focus. He said President Trump's comments to the American people tonight on the election were misleading, dangerous, and most concerningly false. There was a report from Gary Tuckman of CNN, who I used to know because he's come to the UN, and I got quite friendly with him. He's down in Atlanta, and apparently Trump said in the speech that the Georgia election apparatus was being run by Democrats, when apparently this Republican who was in charge of that. So he got things wrong like that. We got to wait to see how Republicans react to this. But there was a good point where one of the commentators said that Trump has a huge base of support. He might run again in 2024. Republicans who want to keep their seats or or go forward with their careers in government are very hesitant to criticize Trump too much because they would alienate this base, these voters who in their own states they may have to rely on. So that's why they butter up Trump. I think a lot of them probably can't stand him, but they can't openly criticize him. But some of them, when it comes to this is a profile in courage. Would they risk their own electoral fortunes to tell Trump to back off? At least privately, they got to be telling him this now. They got to be piling on him, say, let's do the legal challenges, let's do the recounts, and then after that, we'll see what the results are. But don't go around saying that mail-in ballots is a fraudulent process, even if there might be some skullduggery here or there, who knows? But it would be so remote and so rare, as Greg said, you have a better chance of getting hit by lightning than somebody voting twice in an election. So they just got to tell them to back off now. And we're watching here on the side, and still there is no decisive position. CNN's headline is Biden closes in on the presidency, closes gap in Pennsylvania and Georgia, but he's not there yet. So we have anybody else in chat saying anything? Asking any questions? We got Pepe. Okay, Pepe Escobar tells me that he's going to be on in 5 minutes. So I'm going to send him the
Perfect
link, and let's take a break until Pepe comes on. A musical break. We'll be right back with Pepe Escobar from Bangkok to talk us about his view of all of this, and particularly what Asia's and China's view of the election is. See you in a few minutes. Bye. Don't go anywhere. Oh, we're back here at CN Live's Election Central, and we're joined by the once globe-trotting journalist Pepe Escobar, who's now marooned because of the pandemic in Bangkok, Thailand. Pepe, thanks for coming on CN Live. How are you doing?
Hi, everybody. Hi, Joe. Hi, Elizabeth.
It's been a
Hi,
while since we
CN
had you on.
viewers. Look, it's completely, it's for me, like Joe said, it never happened in my life for the past 40 years. Being stranded in the same country for 8 months in a row.
It's maybe you'll start climbing those walls pretty soon, but
Oh, yeah, I'm going to the mountains as soon as I have a break, you know, because it's still the rainy season. I'm going to the Golden Triangle for a few days just to relax because it's been completely demented, especially the past 4 or 5 weeks. You know.
But how is the virus going in Thailand right now? Is it pretty much?
Well, it's totally under control. 59 deaths.
Yeah.
It's one of the best records in the world. I think the best one is Vietnam, and Thailand is probably second best. But the problem is the country is hermetically sealed, and they destroyed the economy.
That's it.
And
they save lives.
Wow, the real unemployment rate is over 40% at the moment. Obviously, you never get this from the Thai authorities, of course, but talking to Thai people around Bangkok, you get a feeling of how bad it is. And if you don't have jobs here, people have to go back to their provinces where obviously there are no jobs as well. So it's a vicious circle. You know, there's no foreign investment coming apart from the Chinese. No business because a businessman cannot come here to strike deals.
What about government assistance? There's no government assistance to people who are out of work?
Well, they ran out of cash. It was the equivalent of $160 a month, roughly. But they ran out of cash and now there's nothing.
Wow.
So it's a dire situation, really. And we are in the middle of a color revolution as well.
Well, that's right. I was going to
which is a mix of color revolution and those grievances about the fact that this is a military dictatorship that only listens to itself and a monarchy that, unlike the previous monarch, King Bhumibol, is completely remote and detached from Thai people. The king spends most of his time in Baviera, in a 5-star hotel, his concubines, his horses, you know, his dogs and all that. And he comes here for a Buddhist ceremony or two. He's been here for the past 2 weeks or so. And then he flies back to...
He can get in and out. He's not hermetically shielded, unlike you.
Exactly. He can get in and out anytime he wants, exactly. And he has a Schengen visa, a Schengen diplomatic visa, of course. Right. So he can go back and forth. The woke generation here, they are really fired up. You know, there have been protests for the past few weeks. There is a constitutional crisis because the protests, they want the constitution to be rewritten because the previous version favored the current military dictatorship disguised as a civilian leadership. It's an extremely complex situation. And obviously, Thailand is in the middle of the US-China overall larger than life dispute.
Right.
As one of the branches of the Chinese New Silk Roads, but with lots of American investments here for decades, so.
Speaking of a constitutional crisis, you may have heard that there's an election going on in the United States.
Which is responsible for me not sleeping this week, Joe, just like you, Elizabeth, and everybody else watching us.
That's right. So first, I want to ask you your personal view of what's going on. You know the latest that Biden's on the verge of maybe winning Pennsylvania. If he does, he'll get the 270 votes. But Trump made those remarks today from the White House. And then I'd like you to later speak, if you can, about what China's views are of this election. So, Pepe, what sense do you make out of this, if you can? What's going on in Washington?
For the moment, Joe, the Chinese reaction is extremely discreet. Like, you don't see editorials in the Global Times, for instance, or in the People's Daily. They are it's a wait and see situation. According to our think tank sources and the people that we know in Beijing or in Shenzhen, obviously they would rather go for President Kamala. Because, all right, maybe the trade war would be softened a little bit. Sanctions, they have no illusions that sanctions will continue to be in place, but it would be more, let's say, less turbulent to deal with a democratic presidency. But this is very informal.
Yeah.
You don't see, for instance, higher ups in the Politburo or people from the finance ministry, going on the record in Xinhua or in one of the major dailies saying anything about it for now, right? Same with the Russians. It's wait and see, on TASS, discussions at the Valdai Club. The Valdai Club, they had another great discussion this week about Russia-China Eurasian integration on top of their meetings 2 weeks ago, which were amazing. They were not covered in the US, by the way, but
never are.
They never are. But this particular Valdai, which was a virtual Valdai, I was very frustrated because I was supposed to go normally, and meet all of them and interview a lot of really, really, heavy hitters in the Russian economy and geopolitics and all that. But it had to be virtual. But what Lavrov said, especially, and then Putin's intervention plus the Q&A afterwards was quite something in terms of the role of the state in the Russian economy, in terms of their drive towards a multipolar world, the Russia-China strategic partnership and all that. So this was extremely important. I talked about it in one of my columns, but I suggest all of you to go to the Valdai Club website. You can actually see most of the discussions, most of the panels on video with English voiceovers, not subtitles, with voiceovers, in fact. And it's a major contrast with what's going on in the US. Same in China, when they had the approval of the 5-year plan last week, the 2021-2025 5-year plan. And then when you put this all together, you see two another world is possible mechanisms flowing in parallel and intersecting in many areas as well, in contrast with the absolutely crazy Western neoliberal obsession, in fact, which includes the US, not only Europe, but the US as well. But coming back to our larger-than-life saga, right? Today I did a gaming exercise, in fact. I wrote the column that I sent, 1 hour ago. It's centered on a gaming exercise, which I called it the Blue gaming exercise. It's a color revolution exercise, but applied to the United States, the land that conceptually invented the concept of color revolution. Of course, I used what's going on from the blue and the red side, the accusations of fraud, the legal battle that it's in front of us ahead for the next few weeks. And I built a narrative that you can read as if it was one of those scenarios in the Transition Integrity Project, the TIP. In fact, the scenario that I put in my exercise is very similar to one of their scenarios, but incorporating what happened since Tuesday night, especially that famous vertical jump in Biden votes in Wisconsin and Michigan. I incorporated that as well. Trump just told us a while ago about fraud again, but without providing any smoking gun. They can't, because the Republican lawyers and investigators and whatever, it's going to take them days. They have to go through recounts. They have to compare what really went on in many of these polling places compared to registered voters. It's going to be hell, of course. But I incorporated all that in my column, and it's a very, very cynical satire. In fact, you can read it as satire, and you can read it as a documentary of what happened these past 3-4 days as well. So I'm very curious to what the response is going to be in the US for this column. I know that the response in the Global South would be largely positive, because most people in the Global South, they are convinced that these elections are fraudulent in many levels on both sides. But I'm curious to see the American reaction, especially now where there's censorship all over. You know that our friend Phil Giraldi, who writes for Strategic Culture, you cannot link to his columns on Facebook, for instance. Our friend Andrew Korybko, who's based in American but based in Moscow, he's being deplatformed everywhere because he goes against the mainstream narrative. So many of us are being censored right and left and in the middle as well. So this is very, very scary. And the fact that if you point out, like many of us did, and I also did, starting from last week, that what we're going to have with a damn presidency is the return of the blob. And not only the blob that was attached to the Trump administration, but the blob as we know it from Obama Biden 1 and Obama Biden 2. So we're going to have basically Obama Biden 3. And last year I gave names: Tony Blinken, Michelle Flournoy. You know about them more than I do, in fact. But a lot of people in the Global South have no idea about these people. And these are the people who will be behind American foreign policy in a damn presidency. So it's very, very scary. And Phil Giraldi, in his columns, he says the same thing, quoting Paul Kennedy's imperial overstretched. He writes that basically forget about a reversal of imperial overstretch. On the contrary. So expect incursions in Syria or in Ukraine, for instance, for 2021 is practically inevitable. And that's why a lot of people in the Global South are extremely worried about it. If they find the correct information about how this is going to morph into an Obama-Biden 3.0 administration.
Do you think, Pepe, that just a question on the census? Yes. I didn't know that about Phil or Andrew.
You didn't know about Phil?
Or Andrew. No, I didn't know that. But you think that, this is a small question, but if Biden wins, will that continue? I mean, has this been an anti-Trump phenomena that we're seeing? And if Trump's gone, will that end the censorship?
And it's a very good question, Joe, because it depends. There is a big tech censorship, in effect, against any journalist or analyst that contradicts the mainstream narrative, which is a damn narrative, essentially, a damn shaped narrative, So it's not a matter of defending Trump. It's a matter of asking questions. So it's a perfect legitimate question to ask about this sudden vertical bumps in those votes in the middle of the night in Wisconsin and Michigan. We still don't have a definitive answer about it. The possibility that there was fraud in this election, which is very, very high, it's a perfect legitimate question, or a set of questions as well. It has nothing to do, in fact, with Trump saying these elections are fraudulent and he has no smoking gun. That's one side of the story. Our role as journalists is to ask questions and to dig deeper. But nowadays we can't. We simply can't. If we do, we are deplatformed or censored on Facebook, or accounts disappear on Google. Like with Press TV, for instance. I was on Press TV, yesterday or 2 days ago, etc. They are deplatformed a little bit everywhere. Or in the case of, what's the name of that site? The American Conservative, or American Herald Tribune, or something like that.
That's what I was reading about today, yes.
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. Which was proscribed, blacklisted, just like that, because I know it's financed by the IRGC. This is ridiculous. I know Professor Tony Hall personally. It's his website. He more or less does 80% of what's published in the website. It's practically a one-man operation, maybe 3 or 4 people. It has nothing to do with Iran. The problem is that Professor Hall and myself, we've been to Iran a few times. So in the eyes of the State Department and the deep state, we are all Iranian agents, just like we are all Russian agents. And that's our friend Phil Giraldi comes in. Everybody that writes for Strategic Culture comes in. That other website, Neo Journal, where William Engdahl publishes, same thing. Stalker Zone, a website that is very, very good, mostly Russian writers. And they have, for instance, the best Russian analysis of what happens in the Ukraine. Blacklisted as well. So, it's the whole thing has to follow one format only. And, it is the death of journalism by 1,000 cuts. So the major cut was Julian's story, of course. And all of us are, the protagonist of the death by 1,000 cuts. They're going after everyone if you deviate from the norm, from the Ministry of Truth narrative. It's very, very scary. Glenn Greenwald, with his story with The Intercept, touched upon it as well. Different paths, but more or less the same story. So any one of us that deviate from the norm, now we are under attack everywhere. And consortium news as well, no question.
Well, Elizabeth, first of all, I want to give an update here. 2 days ago, Trump had a 600,000 vote lead over Biden in Pennsylvania. It is now a 26,000 vote lead, with 95% of the vote counted, all the mail-in ballots. So he's hanging on by a thread, Trump.
By a thread, yes.
A thread, and if Biden takes Pennsylvania,
that's it.
Electoral votes, he's declared the president, and then we'll see how Trump reacts. Elizabeth, do you have any questions?
Well, I just wanted to comment that I agree with you, and I've been observing this censorship as well. I'm also very concerned about it. I agree that the job of journalists is to ask questions and be skeptical. There's nothing wrong with asking questions, as long as if you answer them, and when you answer them, you do it factually. And I think that even Consortium News got called Russian something or other by, I believe, a Canadian news outlet, or a documentary that there's now litigation around. But so you really cannot escape this type of smearing when you do seek the truth, and it happens to be truth that embarrasses power structures. I've asked this of almost every guest we've had on, but you brought up Julian Assange. What do you think will be the difference, if any difference whatsoever, and there may be none, between the Trump administration and a potential Biden administration when it comes to Julian Assange and the extradition attempt that is ongoing now to bring him from the UK to the US?
That's a very good question, Lizette. We don't know if of course, the ultimate decision is the deep states. It's very entrenched and very powerful deep state factions in unison. They will decide the fate of Julian. In fact, it's in fact I see a dark winter scenario for him. No matter who's in the White House, you know, it's a deep state phenomenon. He went against the deep state in public. That's anathema. So he has to be published. Nothing's going to change this equation, you know. So it's not a bipartisan thing or in terms of power politics or who's in the White House. No, it transcends all that. Just like what we're watching now, the way I see it, and I've been discussing this with many friends and analysts, it is a kabuki theater, but it was more or less rehearsed and pre-programmed. Now we have essentially 50% of the US pitted against the other 50% of the US, maybe 52-48, 51-49. But the country is completely irreversibly polarized. Who profits from it? You know better than I do, right? And that's it. So the people who run the gaming, who pre-programmed everything, who concocted different level of psyops, they are just observing remotely this pre-Civil War conflagration, which is after the inauguration, whatever that is in January, is going to be even worse.
So like rats, like laboratory rats in a cage.
Yes, Joe, absolutely. It's an extremely sophisticated psyops, in fact. And of course, the best American analysts, they know this by heart, and they can decode the details. But the general public, they have no idea. They are just polarized into their own formulas or mantras or aggression, in fact. And they don't have enough critical thinking or critical tools to understand how they are being manipulated on all sides. And that's why it's terrible, because it has to do as well with this, the discourse nowadays flows through social media, where you can have a super PhD debunked by an absolute idiot with one adjective, and there's nothing you can do about it.
I'm reminded of someone who tweeted the other day that it takes one idea to convince 1,000 scholars and 1,000 idiots. What is it? I'm screwing it up now.
1,000 details won't convince an idiot.
Yes, and 1,000. Yeah, that's what it takes. One fact to convince 1,000 scholars. 1,000 facts cannot convince one idiot.
Absolutely. So we are living this at 24/7, full time. and there's nothing we can do about it, you know. So I'm always, in all my conversations, we're always talking about what's the point for us to keep writing long essays with lots of links, quoting books, and it's absolutely pointless. Yeah, you're gonna have an idiot from the typical village idiot, as Umberto Eco famously, he said that before he died, a few years before he died. I think it was one of the best things Eco said in public ever. He said that the internet had elevated the village idiot to the condition of an oracle. And you have village idiots as oracles all over the place. And there's nothing we can do about it. And
one or the other is going to become president of the United States.
Exactly. Exactly. And we have exactly.
Yeah, I was about to say, we have everything from QAnon on 4chan, which is the village idiot that you're describing in one way, but then you have the Blue Anon Russiagate village idiot speaking in the Washington Post and the New York Times and all these other outlets. So it's really a shambles across the board. And it seems like when it comes to the 1,000 fact joke, Julian Assange gave us those 1,000 facts. He sided
Yes.
on the side of the public. And as Joe and I were talking about earlier, when you really do look at it, obviously the public is not represented by whoever wins this presidential election or any presidential election. And so Julian Assange, by being on the side of the people, he's against the side of both potential presidents. So either, like you said, that either way, he's not going to be served very well by whoever wins.
Absolutely, Elizabeth. So Julian remains the #1 example for the whole planet of what all of us who try to impart information or at least decode what's going on and try to explain to other people. The fate that awaits us in short term, mid-term, and long term, you know.
Well, Pepe, I know why you keep writing. It's the same reason why I keep writing. It's for yourself, to keep sane and to figure it out, not to fight against this environment. Orwell said that writing was revenge against, what was it? Revenge against, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting this thing. It's a revenge against reality.
Yes.
So you have to preserve your own mind, keeping up with what's going on, figuring it out for yourself. And in the meantime, you might as well impart it to others if they're interested, right?
You're right, Joe. It's a very romantic notion, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm always reminded of, I always keep in my mind the Keats, Coleridge, Byron, the Brit Romantics, in fact. We do this, it's an altruistic impulse. It's an inner drive. It's an impossible dream. And like we create for ourselves the illusion that what we do matters and what we do may change something, you know. Well, with age, of course, you understand that it may change one or two people, you know, you may change your family somewhere and all that, but that's it.
Yeah, they'll stop talking to you. That's
yes.
How change your family.
Is that they stop talking?
Yeah, when they read your column. That's how they change your family. Pepper, let me ask you this. We're talking about the censorship. What happened with Greenwald is you wrote a piece about these laptop emails and photographs of Hunter Biden. Mm-hmm. And the New York Post published it. And then, yes, as we all know, Twitter and Facebook simultaneously shut that down. And the whole New York Post, which is the oldest continuously published newspaper in the United States, by the way, it's a tabloid and there's a lot of problems with it. But and then Greenwald wanted to write a piece for the Intercept, which he co-founded, and they wouldn't let him write it. So he quit, gave up a lot of money for that. So I'm curious about whether anybody in China knew anything about the Chinese Biden family connection. How does China see that?
Look, you don't see this in Chinese media or even in commentary. And I asked some of our friends in Hong Kong and Shenzhen, is this being discussed in the Chinese Weibo, for instance, in Chinese social media or that? No. The Greenwald story for them is very remote. And very few Chinese have details about the Intercept, about who Greenwald is, why he quit something that he co-founded, the involvement of Pierre Omidyar, you know, virtually nobody.
I'm talking about the Hunter Biden story. Are they familiar with Hunter Biden? He's been in China.
Yes, exactly. You can see the public opinion in China is exactly, and this is something that you read in editorials in Xinhua or People's Daily or China Daily, etc. There's it's interesting the way most Chinese see it. It's a corroboration for them of the rot in American politics, which is something that is for them is already an established notion. So for them, this is an extra example, but with a different political party. Of course, for the past 4 years, they have been absolutely driven absolutely mad by everything that the Trump administration throws at China. But now they see that the other party as well is internally completely corrupted as well. So that's why I think even on a public opinion level in China, mass public opinion, as well as the leadership, there are no illusions about a damn presidency at all. They expect the sanctions to continue, essentially. they expect at least a measure of dialogue compared to what we had, especially these past 2 years. All right. But nobody's thinking, for instance, that the sanctions against Huawei are going to disappear. Because this is being explained by Chinese media that it's an American national policy, independent of partisan politics. It's part of the national security strategy. China is the top competitor, much more than Russia. They understand the notion that China now is not only the top economic power in the world, the Chinese already see it. In fact, they analyze in terms of PPP, not gross GDP. So under PPP, in PPP terms, China is already the number one economic power in the world, the number one trade power in the world. They're going to clinch a mega trade deal around here in Asia, the RCEP deal, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is what TPP, Obama's TPP, wanted to be. But in fact, we're going to have RCEP with China included and all the major players here, the ASEAN 10, the 10 Southeast Asians, plus Japan, South Korea, Australia, and New Zealand. And the Indians, in another fabulous example of stabbing yourself in the back, they are out. So India is going to be increasingly irrelevant in trade terms across Asia. And next year, they're going to clinch the famous, which is being discussed for years now, China-European Union trade deal.
Why is India staying up? Because of pressure from the U.S.?
Yes, for two main reasons. One, that they think that RCEP is basically a China deal, which is not, because this is being discussed for at least for the past 2 or 3 years extensively among everybody, including India. But they say, no, we're going to be invaded again by Chinese products. You have to modernize your industry, your manufacturing capabilities. India doesn't export anything like China, good manufactured products. They are all made in India, stays in India. It's not exported. You know, you don't even find it in Bangladesh, for instance. You don't find you find maybe textiles in but much more textiles from Bangladesh than India, but you find Indian textiles in parts of Asia. That's it, you know, not much. And the other reason is that the Indian elites under Modi, in fact, those Hindutva, Hindu nationalist supremacists, they actually believe in the Indo-Pacific concept. It's completely nuts. They think that they're going to be treated by Washington as, you know, same level players in the Indo-Pacific structure with Japan and Australia as well. Completely absurd, a mirage, completely. But this is what they believe at the moment. So add 1 and 2, and you know, they pulled out of the RCEP discussions, and they said, okay, maybe we come in later. But then the train already left the station. They're going to sign this. They were supposed to sign this before the end of 2020. Okay, maybe beginning of next year, but already left the station. Big trade deal with all the major East Asia players, and India will be out.
You know, at least Australians are aware that they are a colony, basically, of the United States.
Exactly.
But they go along with it anyway. At least they're unlike the Indians you're describing.
Unlike the Indians, exactly.
They know the score. Let me ask you now, Biden administration would not in any way change or maybe make more aggressive a containment strategy and to try to disrupt Russian-Chinese integration, as you were discussing, Kamala. Is that
yes
how they see it?
Absolutely correct, Joe. Because okay, the three. This is 90% of what I have been writing for the past 5 years, at least. I think practically each and every column that I write is linked to this ongoing process of Eurasian integration in myriad levels: geopolitical, geoeconomic, trade, investment, connectivity, and all that. And the three major poles are Russia, China, and Iran, which little by little, they are integrating slowly but surely. We have many examples. The Russia-China strategic partnership in so many levels. And now, like Putin said a few days ago, and everybody in the US was like, military, direct military collaboration at the highest level in terms of even exchanging military secrets. It's a military alliance in the making. I would say medium to long term, but Putin himself on the record already said it's possible. No? We have the famous 25-year, $400 billion Iran-China deal, which is basically trade, investment, connectivity, Chinese investment in the Iranian energy industry, which is essential. They don't have that kind of money. Modernization of Iran in terms of building metro lines like they were building in Tehran, high-speed rail, fiber optics, all that. The integration of the different corridors of the new Silk Roads, no? Central Asia, Southeast Asia, the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which, you know, they, as part of this corridor, they inaugurated a few days ago the first metro in Lahore in Pakistan. It's something huge. Lahore is an enormous city. Circulation is an absolute mess. And now they have their first metro line. Can you imagine? So this is something we're going to see soon in Islamabad, in Karachi, in major Pakistani cities. Chinese technology, and it's part of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which is the link to Gwadar especially, and the Arabian Sea, which is an extra outlet for the Chinese, you know. So all this is proceeding in tandem, you know. And then Russia, the same thing, lots of Chinese investment in Eastern Siberia. And something that has been discussed at the highest level as well, the integration of both Koreas with Eastern Siberia. So this means South Korea will have a direct land-based access to the Eurasian continent. And this is something that they don't have at the moment because North Korea is in the middle. So what do we have? We have Putin, Moon, and Kim Jong-un sitting down together and say, okay, how are we going to unite the Korean Peninsula and then unite us with Eastern Siberia, you Russians? Ongoing process. They have been discussing this for at least the past 2 years, irrespective of the Trump-Kim Jong-un meetings, you know. So this is all proceeding in parallel, in tandem, you know, in different levels, and you have other important players in Central Asia, or Pakistan, or Turkey. They are slowly but surely being integrated as well. So if you look at what may happen in the next 15 years, which is a horizon that the Chinese themselves included in the 5-year plan, they have something called Vision 2035. 2035 for the Chinese is very important because it's the midterm between where we are now and 2049, the 100th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. And in 2035, they had already planned. In fact, it's three 5-year plans in one that they discussed last week. You know, not only this one until 2025, where they plan to be one of the top technological powers in the world, but they plan all the major steps to arrive in 2035 as the top in virtually everything. And that includes, of course, the expansion of all these new Silk Road corridors. 6 of them, plus the Maritime Silk Road, everywhere in Asia. So uniting East Asia all the way to Turkey and Eastern Europe, and arriving in those major destinations in Western Europe, in Germany especially, in Venice, in Madrid by train, in London by train as well. So you've never seen anything like this in history. It's an enormous trade, investment, connectivity process uniting the whole of Eurasia, and they are starting. If you look at the official timetable, next year, 2021, starts the implementation phase. So we're not even implementing, according to the Chinese. What happened these past 7 years since they announced the New Silk Road 7 years ago? It's the pre-planning, setting up projects, starting projects, and all that. The real thing starts next year, and then we have one of those beautiful cosmic coincidences when the Chinese economy will start to pick up again, like there's no tomorrow, because they are already over COVID. So next year, I expect the Chinese economy to boom like crazy, and obviously they will have enough extra funds to invest in all these connectivity projects outside of China as well. So this is what they discussed in the 5-year plan. The official denomination is double development dynamic, translated from Mandarin. So invest a lot in the domestic economy, and at the same time invest in all these projects. China goes west, right? Goes west, arriving in Europe. And I follow what is discussed in the US about that. The only thing that I see is Belt and Road is a debt trap. Belt and Road is a Chinese domination in the rest of the world. Belt and Road is a communist subversion, etc. They don't analyze the facts. They don't analyze how this is being developed.
Well, Pepe,
by
let me interrupt you a second.
Yes.
As you were describing all those things, these incredible things with Putin and the South Koreans and linking Russia with the United Korean Peninsula, I'm thinking people in the corridors of the Pentagon, CIA, the State Department, they can't do anything. What can they do about it? It drives them crazy. What could they do about any of this?
You're right, Joe. What they can do about it, apart from launching examples of hybrid war here and there. So, okay, let's try to destabilize Xinjiang. Probably let's send some special forces to connect with the Xinjiang separatists over there. The Chinese already know about this shit for decades. Let's try some
let's take a couple of seconds.
It's
It's fixed. Okay.
okay.
Good. All right. If you have a question, I have several
Yeah,
more.
sure.
Go ahead.
And I have a few questions from chat here, and they may be relatively short to answer, but I thought I'd throw them at you anyway. So one of them is whether China and Iran and their connection will prevent the U.S. bombing Iran, or suppose increasing tension with Iran.
Definitely, because now there is, it's not acknowledged in public, but China has made a commitment in the background to the Iranian leadership that if you are in dire straits in terms of an American operation, we got your back. And this is something that the Russians also have made very discreetly. It's part of these talks between Zarif and Wang Yi. When Zarif was with Wang Yi in Beijing, 2 weeks ago or so. And Lavrov and Zarif, who get along very, very well, So this, we know this is in the cards, and we know that the Americans know about it. And obviously they won't try anything against it, especially because whatever they try, the level of made in Iran weaponry now is very, very serious. And the Pentagon knows it. Not only they gamed it, and everything that they gamed was a disaster from an American point of view, they know that if they try anything in the Persian Gulf, for instance, Iranians can do anything they want. Their coastline is lined up with missiles. They can shut down the Strait of Hormuz in one evening if they wanted. They can mine the Strait of Hormuz, for instance. This will provoke a collapse of the global economy, among other things. So this obviously, the intel environment knows about it. So once again, going back to the possible only good news in all that, this would imply that a then presidency would start some sort of rapprochement with Iran starting next year. But let's have no illusions once again.
Right, yeah. And so one of the things we were talking about earlier on the stream was the potential for Kamala Harris to be a relatively strong war hawk. And given the fact that Biden isn't all there at this point, and that his presidency probably will be, if not fully taken over by Kamala Harris, at least, in principle, he won't be the person really at the helm of the ship. What does that look like for foreign policy? How dangerous is that in terms of a World War III type scenario? I mean, if in the absolute worst case scenario, what do you think would develop under Kamala Harris' presidency?
Well, Kamala Harris, in terms of foreign policy, is a cipher, isn't it? I'm not sure anyone in the US knows about Kamala Harris' foreign policy views. So it's a cipher. This means she'll be under total control of the deep state machinery. And that's why it's so dangerous. Of course, Biden, the same thing, assuming he survives a few months into the presidency. Don't forget that technically he is on stage 2 dementia. I talked to some professionals, they told me it's stage 2 dementia. They can keep him up with meds, with drugs, but the rot of in the mind is irreversible. It takes a while. Sometimes it takes weeks, sometimes it takes months, sometimes it takes 1 year or 2. And all of us who had a similar experience on a family level, which is my case with my mom, for instance, you can tell right away. You cannot fool. If we dealt with a similar situation, you just look at his pattern of behavior, his eyes, and you immediately detect it, And so it's not going to last long. And then we're going to have a cipher as commander-in-chief. Wow.
Absolutely. Oof. I mean, you really can see his decline. I mean, it just in the last week or so, we saw him seem to confuse Trump's name with George Bush's name, and his wife Jill was next to him mouthing Trump, and he's had a few sentences that were absolute gibberish. It's really becoming very clear. But the question also from the chat arises, that who will decide America's foreign policy? And that does relate a little bit to what is Kamala Harris going to be like, but also, forgetting her for a second, what behind the scene really controls American foreign policy? Some people think that it's Israel. Some people have different opinions whether it's defense contractors. What's your take on that?
It's a mix of all that. It's a mix of Israel, of course, the extremely powerful defense contractors, and the revolving door around the defense contractors, and some very specific characters that will be very powerful in the next administration, like Tony Blinken, probably the National Security Advisor, and Michel Flournoy, probably head of the Pentagon. So you just look at the background of these people. In fact, we're talking about imperial functionaries. If you look at what they did before, you have a pretty good idea what they're going to do afterwards. So it's a concourse of circumstance and the solidified machine of the deep state, which is no wonder a lot of people around the global south are very, very worried about it. For instance, to give a South American example, I talked to some good friends in Argentina, for instance, analysts. They say that essentially, next year they're going to come not only against Bolivia and Venezuela, but against us as well in Argentina. And that's absolutely no question. Brazil is a different case because Brazil at the moment is a colony. It's a it's one of the most pathetic geopolitical developments of the past 100 years or so. How they managed to turn Brazil into a neo-colony in a matter of 3 or 4 years, in fact, even before the coup against Dilma, which was 4 years ago. Argentina is complicated because Argentina has very close relations with China, and Argentina can be the spark for another pink tide in South America. So the deep state is going, they'll come out all guns blazing, destabilizing Argentina. So it's going to be a hybrid war all over the place, And Bolivia, they're not going to let Bolivia to be relatively independent. Forget it. Out of the question.
Yeah. That's a very good point you made about those of us who've had parents. And my father had dementia. And just the other day, I was telling someone, when I see Biden, I see my father. I thought that was my father.
Of course, Joe. Of course.
The vacant look in the face.
The vacant look. It was the first thing that struck me months ago already. The vacant look. And that's it. You cannot disguise that. You can take tons of meds, but it just slows down an irreversible process,
Yeah, my grandfather's the same way.
Same way I'm saying. So all of us who had a familiar experience with it, we can detect it right away, right?
I'm going to talk to you about Ukraine now because, as we all know from the famous leaked conversation between Victoria, I forgot what nickname you had for Victoria, but Victoria Nuland and
I call her Maidan Cookie Distributor.
Okay, Maidan Cookie. Yeah, and with Jeffrey Piat, the then American ambassador, they were discussing who was going to lead Ukraine weeks before Yanukovych was overthrown. They decided on Yatsenyuk and Yatsenyuk. So they were talking about a coup. I mean, there's no way you could deny that. And They didn't deny it. And the American press and only talked about, she said, fuck the EU. Like that was the whole story. That was basically, it was nothing what she said, but they distracted it. But the key thing there, she says, Joe Biden and the UN, Joe Biden is going to kind of glue this all together. That Joe is going to have a key role. And guess what? The coup took place. Joe became basically the viceroy of the United States to run Ukraine, where he was bullying in ministries, including the Justice Ministry, to get rid of that prosecutor who, under testimony in a court case in Austria, said he fired me because I was going to investigate his son's company. And by the way, how did his son get on the company? No, I don't know. There's no proof Biden put his son there. But this is like 19th century colonialism. You take over a country, you install your people, and
you install your people.
The Treasury Secretary, a former State Department U.S. official, became the finance minister of Ukraine. the day after she got Ukrainian citizenship. And Jeffrey Archer is a family friend of the Kerrys, and he was a partner with Hunter Biden in Burisma. We were writing about this. I'm sure you were too at the time it was happening. And then Monsanto got contracts, so that it was a complete takeover because they were afraid once Yanukovych said he wasn't going to go with the EU, he was going to go to the Russian deal. That was it. The coup was started. So now Biden is going to become president, it looks like. We're still watching to see what happens in Pennsylvania. If he's president, he might remember a thing or two about Ukraine. And therefore, this scandal erupted that almost, that may have hurt him because it's not a landslide that many people predicted against Trump. So maybe the scandal that the Twitter tried to suppress, that the New York Post published, that Greenwald had to quit over, maybe that hurt him. You said at the beginning of our conversation, you thought Biden was going to start ramping up maybe a hardcore military aid to Ukraine to heat up the civil war in the Donbass. I want you to tell me more about that. Now, Obama didn't want to give military hardware. Trump did, but yet there was never really a re-emergence of that war. Now, tell us about what Biden would do and about whether the Minsk plan is even on life support or not.
Yes, it's what the deep state would do, Joe, in fact. They simply cannot get over the fact that there was a military defeat in the Donbass in 2014. When I went to Donetsk in 2015, in the spring of 2015, and they took me to the battlefield. It was an absolutely amazing sight. It was a relatively circumscribed battlefield, or 20 square kilometers or so. This was the key battle between the Donetsk Luhansk forces and the Kiev forces, and it was a rout. And I'm sure our friends in the Pentagon who game wars and all that, they were stunned because it was that classic cauldron Russian tactic. You surround your enemy, and your enemy inside is in a cauldron, and then you devastate your enemy from all angles. This is exactly what happened. It's about 3 hours away from Donetsk, So they want revenge, but how? The Kiev's military forces are a joke. The only thing that they know, the only thing that they do, in fact, is to shell suburbs of Donetsk, for instance, or the airport, for that matter. That's it. They don't have a cohesive military capable of staging an advance and taking over Luhansk, Donetsk, or at least parts of Donbass. So what could they do? Send special forces and subvert. They already did this years ago. They killed the governor of Donetsk. You remember that? Huh?
Yeah.
Send special forces to Donetsk and Lugansk. It's not, you're not going to conquer any territory with that. And what remains of the industry in Donbass is linked to Russia already. It was and remains linked to Russia already. Anyway, again, right? So even if they create, let's say, a more militarized front, trying to draw Russian forces in, the Russians won't take the bait. First of all, because the people in Donbass are very well organized, and they have enough military forces, including Cossack militias. I visited one of them, talked to one of their commanders. They're very, very well organized on a village level. It's you can even draw a parallel with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. In villages in southern Lebanon. Very well organized, very well weaponized, connectivity. Word of mouth. So it's impossible to conquer a territory like that unless you have a blitzkrieg, a juggernaut, which is not going to happen.
What about Zelensky? Would he go along with an escalation of the U.S.? Was he strong enough to resist that?
We don't know. That's a good question, Joe. We don't know. We really don't know. He's been
the
trying to
American
play.
people and our right to vote.
Sorry, that was
Ah.
CNN people in there.
Who was that? Was CNN?
Yes, that's
No news for the moment.
Huh?
No fresh news, nah? This past few minutes, at least.
No, Biden closing in on the presidency is what they're saying.
Closing in on both Georgia and Pennsylvania, right?
We thought we might have an answer by now. That's why we went on the air. But I'm enjoying this conversation immensely with you, Pepe. It's more interesting than the election.
My pleasure. But I like that you ask me questions that I need to try to find. For instance, I'm not following Ukraine for the past few weeks, for obvious reasons, you know. So, but I assume there are no new facts on the ground. And I recommend seriously for all of you watching us, go to Stalker Zone and read a guy called Rostislav Irchenko. His articles are translated into English. I met Rostislav in Moscow. The guy knows everything about Ukraine. He's absolutely brilliant. And they translate most of his top columns into English, and they publish at Stalker Zone. So if you read Irchenko, you're going to have a pretty good idea of what's really going on the ground in the Ukraine.
I'm going to read it before they shut it down, before they take it off the internet.
Before they shut it down, exactly. Yeah. But if you go through, for instance, if you share what they publish on VK, the Russian Facebook, let's put it this way, no problem. But if you try to link to them on Facebook, forget it, no way. Or Twitter, forget it.
We've got a number of different questions in chat. They're ranging on a lot of different subjects. The latest one was, what are the chances for a revival of the TPP, in your opinion?
Absolutely zero. Because, really, absolutely zero, because the successor of the TPP, which at the time was the competitor, is the RCEP, which is going to be signed, if not in December. Well, they're postponing this forever. If not in December, early next year. And like we discussed, everybody's on board except India. So they don't need a TPP.
We've got another question. What about, please tell us about the ongoing de-dollarization efforts in Eurasia.
Ooh, wow. Need hours for this.
Not to ask you to speak for an hour on that one question.
Exactly.
Shortly.
Wow. All the major players, which means Russia, China, and Iran, they are increasingly trying to bypass the US dollar. And some of them are actually bypassing en masse the US dollar. The thing is how they're going to coordinate. This would be the next step. So there are discussions already on how they're going to coordinate their payment systems, the Chinese payment system, the Russian payment system, and later they could bring Iran as well. So then you have a sort of alternative SWIFT bypassing the US dollar. All of this, once again, it's long term, but already started and it's ongoing, right? In bilateral trade, for instance, China and Iran, as far as we know, they are completely bypassing the US dollar. China, Russia, they are getting to close to 50% of their trade in respective currencies, ruble and yuan. So as you can see, this thing is progressing very, very fast. The thing is to bring other major Eurasian players on board. Pakistan, India is going to be impossible, at least for short, medium term. Pakistan, Turkey, the Central Asians. So this is something that is being discussed at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization level. Of course, between the People's Bank of China and the Russian Central Bank and all that. So, but it's ongoing. It's ongoing. They know, and this is something they started discussing at the BRICS sessions already in the late 2000s, to give an idea of how long this is. way back. You know, when Lula was still the Brazilian president, Lula was a big, big, big driver of we need to do the trade amongst us bypassing the dollar. And at the time was Medvedev and Hu Jintao. They loved it. So they started discussing this around 2009, 2010. So now, 10 years later, you know, when you compare to what was happening 10 years earlier, wow, big territory, you know. I would say realistically, we can have a great deal of Eurasia bypassing the US dollar and trading their own currencies or in a basket of currencies in 10 years' time, by 2030. And certainly according to the Chinese, officially, certainly by 2035, because they see 2035 as China with a convertible yuan and a yuan as an international currency. So this means they're going to do all their trade in yuan. And everybody will have to adapt, including that famous, the famous day, the fateful day when the Chinese are going to disembark in Riyadh and tell the House of Saud, from now on, it's yuan only, guys.
I cannot imagine what the U.S. economy is going to look like on that day. It will not be pretty.
Well, it's from a Washington point of view, it's enough grounds to launch a nuclear attack against Saudi Arabia.
Exactly. No, I mean, it doesn't look good in terms of the economy. It would look very bad in terms of war. No question.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Bleak outlook. So another question was, do you think the withdrawal from the Middle East will continue? And I don't know that that's predicated on, I don't know that we've truly withdrawn it, but yeah, that's the question.
Yes, it requires a very complex answer, because if you ask the deciding instances of the deep state, they will say never. So this means maintaining that ridiculously massive embassy in Baghdad with lots of contractors inside and in the vicinity, maintaining lily pads here and there, including Syria, maintaining all the big bases in Qatar, in the Emirates. So, no, realistically, they won't back down. The thing is, for instance, if you think in terms of the greater Middle East, to come back to Condoleezza Rice's terminology, Afghanistan, sooner or later, they will have, the only thing practically that is going to be left in Afghanistan is going to be Bagram, which is a huge base as well. But you have the Taliban talking to the Afghan government, the Pakistanis, the Indians, the Chinese, the Russians, and the Iranians, all within the framework of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, trying to find a solution for Afghanistan only with Asians. And that obviously will imply no foreign bases in Afghan territory. So this would be the big deal in the next 2, 3, 4 years. And I'm sure the deep state, they're going to do every dirty trick in the book to try to convince the government in Kabul that they need American protection. Which, in fact, is that a cat? Yes, it is a cat.
Yes, it's my sister's cat. Yes.
Well, I'm a big cat person, so he's beautiful.
Yeah, he's very pretty.
So the cat interfered with our Afghan talk.
Well, the last question was going to return to Trump, and it was someone asking, I want to know Pepe's comments on media censorship of Trump's announcements. And we have talked a little bit about media censorship today, but that was the question.
Yes. Wow. Before talking to you guys, I saw that the 3 networks cut off when Trump started talking about the possibility of fraud in the elections. Well, and he's being obviously directly censored by Twitter.
Which
each of his tweets now is censored, de facto censored. So that tells you everything, right?
What do you mean? What networks? Because I saw it on CNN.
Look, I before I talk to you, there was a huge headline saying that ABC, NBC, and CBS cut off Trump's talk when he was talking about
Really?
fraud in the election.
Goodness, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I heard that.
Well, I have to check this out when we finish. Yeah, but this is what a huge headline in the Guardian. In fact, I think I still have it here. Give me 1 second.
Yeah, while you do that, I just want to say that I did see.
If I can find it.
Yeah.
You saw that, Elizabeth?
Yeah, I saw a reference to it. People were discussing why they thought it had happened, and some people said it was out of spite, but that was just a random hot take. So.
Well, it's news. Whatever he says, that's whatever craziness it is. We got to hear what he has to say.
Yeah, it was one of their. It disappeared as a headline, guys. It was their main headline a few, 40 minutes ago. Now it's not here anymore. Maybe it's in their live results blog. No, I cannot see it anywhere. I found it.
Censorship of censorship.
Networks cut Trump's speech as some Republicans chastise president over election law. Networks cut Trump's speech. Absolutely. That's what happened.
I mean, as he was speaking, when he started saying
as he was speaking. That's quite something, isn't it?
It is. To CNN's credit, they showed the whole thing.
Yeah, that showed the whole thing. Well, at least, yeah.
That's well, we got to know what he's saying. I mean, I wrote my article on conservative news based on seeing him speak on CNN. So we got to know what he has to say.
Apparently no smoking gun again, but he was reiterating that there's fraud everywhere and there are lawsuits we are investigating, etc.
That used to happen at the UN and the General Assembly when the Syrian ambassador began speaking. Suddenly there was a technical difficulty.
A technical difficulty, right?
Like
yes.
Times when over a couple of months, every time he went to speak, they lost sound somehow. So they're not giving a reason that ABC or NBC, whatever the networks were, they're not giving a reason. They haven't responded.
At least not yet, Joe. Maybe later. At least not yet.
They have the guts to say we made an editorial decision. We thought it was false. So just like Twitter has been hiding his tweets,
this is probably what they're going to say. It's an editorial decision.
Wow.
False information.
Just like Twitter. Like Twitter, it gives him an excuse to say he's the victim and the outsider.
Well, exactly. And the editorial decision is let him say something, and then you pick it apart afterward in your analysis of what he says. That's
exactly. Then you have analysis. You have news analysis immediately after the fact. But that disappears completely from many outlets, right?
That's scary. Well, maybe they're afraid of one thing, which I understand. It could be that he's riling up his people on the ground, which leads me to what I wanted to ask you next, Pepper. You lived in the U.S., right? You lived in L.A. You've been all over the country.
And in Washington as well.
Washington. Yeah. So you know the American culture and population, and even if you haven't been living there now, you can understand how it's escalated to this kind of unbelievable.
Absolutely. I have many good friends in the U.S. who are always in contact. Absolutely.
What is going to happen here in terms of a lot may depend on what Trump says and does.
Yes.
But people are talking about real violence here. I mean, serious violence breaking out over this election, like in Kenya about 10 years ago. If you remember, there was huge riots after an election in Kenya.
Absolutely.
What's your take on that? What do you think?
Wow. There's a strong possibility, depending on the language Trump employs, when he's not going to recognize what would be the final result. In fact, we're not going to have a final result for weeks, right? I think the final result is only by December, right? The final vote tally.
The electoral college has to go.
The electoral college, the first electoral
12th December.
College meeting is in December, right? Exactly.
Middle of December.
So, depending on how he's going to spend this next few weeks, which obviously he won't concede, that's for sure, and how he's going to frame the legal battle, which, as far as I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, they're going to try to appoint a special counsel to investigate Biden, right? Is that a possibility? I think that's a strong possibility.
Well, there was talk of that before the election, but if he wins, they could still do it. Yeah, they investigated Trump. Yeah,
exactly. And how one or two investigations of the laptop from hell are going to proceed from now, or if they have a definitive smoking gun linking Joe Biden directly to everything that was uncovered in the laptop from hell. So this could be, and he obviously with the dog whistle is very easy. It takes one adjective or one expression to rally millions of people. So, and these people are already fired up. I think they are preparing. I read a lot of chat and blogs of right wing. I have to know what the right wing is thinking, right? And the impression that I have is that people are getting ready for it, like that famous call to the Proud Boys, nah?
Yeah,
stand by. And you can say that millions of people are standing by at the moment, and obviously they will agree with Trump's analysis of a fraudulent election.
It's not as if things were calm in the U.S. We've had incredible uprisings in the last few months, and right and left wing fighting each other, and there have been murders and shootings. So, but this is the cauldron into which this election is thrown into. In the middle of the pandemic, after the George Floyd murder, the years of frustration of the police. I want to point this out. It just occurred to me that ABC, NBC, and CBS are free over-the-air television. So people who want to watch CNN have to pay for that.
They have to pay, exactly.
Now, a lot of Trump supporters are not very well off. Let's face it; they are unemployed. They're badly employed. So they may not have cable. So ABC, CBS, and NBC thinking a bigger audience of ours are Trump supporters than CNN. So we're going to cut it off. I wonder if that was the thinking.
That's a very good point, Joe. Very, very good point, in fact. And I was looking at the breakdown of age. I found a table that is, let me see if I can find it here. Voting by age. Most of the votes for Biden were between 18 and 29. So the woke generation voted Biden. And people over 65, the vote for Trump was, negligible. Practically nothing. They didn't even vote. They didn't even care to vote. So, yeah, so we got so you have a cleavage between the woke generation and over 65s on one side, and rural and urban on the other side, and they intersect these two cleavages. No?
By the way, that Senate investigation would have to take place before January, because right now that's 48 to 48 in terms. We still don't have the Senate elections in yet.
Exactly. There are two seats, and these two seats are in Georgia, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Is it in Georgia? Yeah. I don't know. I'd have to click on this and find out. I'll tell you in a second. 48 Democrats, 48 Republicans. One flipped seat, two flipped by the Democrats. Georgia, Georgia's only counted 98%. That's correct. And North Carolina is not in yet either. Georgia.
Okay.
The Republicans.
But the projections are basically saying that they're going to keep the Senate.
Well, the Republicans are leading in both North Carolina, very, very razor thin, and in Georgia, and in Alaska, by the way.
And in Alaska, exactly.
They're going to win. But that, I think, was already Republican. So
yes, it was already Republican. Yeah.
So it looks like the Republicans could gain control of the Senate here if they win Georgia and North Carolina. But if it's a 50-50 tie, as you know, then it depends who's in the White House, because the vice president
in the White House, exactly,
breaks the tie.
But so far, most of the projections are giving the Senate to the Republicans. And in the House, the Democrats, they lost a lot of seats in the House, which is crazy, completely crazy.
Yeah, the Republicans will keep the Senate most likely,
Yes, most
uh,
likely.
but by a hair. And the House, let's look at the House. Yeah, they're down 5 seats.
Down 5 seats.
Down 5
which is
seats.
a lot.
33 remain to be decided. So Republicans have a chance even. Now it's net 6 gain of the Republicans. They have an outside chance. They only trail 209 to 193. That's 16 seats.
It's not much. Yes.
Amazing. This is supposed to have been a blue wave. This is supposed to have been Biden.
The only blue wave is Manchester City playing in England. That's a blue wave.
Give me just your take on the primary and what happened with Sanders, and Sanders' reaction to that. How he said, "I'm going to go for Biden," but without using the leverage he had to get any commitments towards
He
his.
folded, Joe. He folded. He folded immediately afterwards. He didn't fight internally, and then he immediately collapsed, folded completely, and joined the Biden camp. Wow. People who admire Sanders everywhere, like, in Brazil, for instance, or in Europe, in Italy, in Spain, or France, where he's very popular, by the way, they were like, how come? He didn't even put up a fight.
Yeah, he had his huge base behind him.
Huge base.
Central Democrats need that base to win. They needed them. He
Exactly.
couldn't hold them over a barrel and say, I want this, I want that, I want that, and you better, if you don't come through, there's going to be trouble. But he didn't do anything. At least Corbyn, they had to kick Corbyn out of the Labor Party. This guy did it.
They had to kick Corbyn, exactly. And with those bogus anti-Semitism accusations, it's completely absurd. Totally absurd.
I guess they didn't do it to Bernie because he's Jewish, so that would be hard.
Nah, you can't do it to Bernie, exactly. But Bernie, if Bernie was the candidate, he would probably be elected by 9 p.m.
This would be the second term.
On election day, yeah.
If they'd allowed him to run last time, this would be his second term, probably.
Exactly, it'll be his second term. Absolutely.
It's a disgrace.
Well, but you cannot. But the Dem environment, wow, it's worse than the blob itself. It's part of the blob, of course, but it's worse than the blob itself. It's in a class by itself in terms of internal corruption. And if these investigations over the laptop from hell, the problem is, can you trust this Republican team? Giuliani, you cannot trust these people. You have to be an independent investigation. Say, what's the real story about the laptop from hell? But an independent investigative commission, which is not going to happen.
No, Pepe, the way I understood it, and I didn't delve very deeply into this story, but Biden did make these deals, but right after he left office, like 2 months into 2017, it was like March.
Right after he left office.
So that it was legal then, in a way. But he may have set it all up while he was still vice president and used clearly his influence in that office to get what he wanted. That's the allegation. But that he closed the deal when he was no longer in government. So there's nothing illegal about what he did.
Absolutely. And that's the problem with, they don't have a smoking gun. I'm not sure they're going to find one.
My problem is the coup d'etat that the U.S. Directed in Ukraine that overthrew a corrupt but democratically elected president, Viktor Yanukovych. That never gets mentioned by the Republicans.
No, it never gets mentioned.
Or the Democrats. That's the backdrop to this whole story about Ukraine.
Yes, it never gets mentioned, Joe, and it will never be investigated in the U.S. Never. Never.
At least the Britain, they had the Chilcot inquiry about Iraq.
Yes.
Never investigate their major international crimes, basically. And that will never be known. That's excised. None of it was investigated by government, by the press. They've completely buried this role that the U.S. played in the overthrow of that government, allowing Biden and others to go in there. Running the country as the viceroy. And if you don't put that into the background of the story, if it's only this laptop here, or the whole thing about the prosecutor, it's isolated. It's part of Biden's role in Ukraine, and he got away with it. That really annoyed me, I have to say. He got away with it. He's going to become president now.
but you know, the deep state and the U.S. establishment can get you know, in different parts of the global South, you can get away with virtually everything. They got away with everything that they set up for the coup in Brazil against Dilma,
Right.
which started way back in 2010 with the NSA. They got away scot-free. They can get away with all the bribing that went on in Hong Kong last year.
Mm-hmm.
You know that the former U.S. ambassador in Hong Kong is here now in Bangkok?
No.
Aha, nice, isn't it? Color revolution now is 2 hours 45 minutes. You know, it took a plane in Hong Kong and landed here in Bangkok.
It's got to work when he landed.
Exactly.
Very quickly, I have a very fast question for you from chat. We've been repeatedly asked if you have a Twitter handle, and if so, what is it?
No, I don't have Twitter because you know why I don't have Twitter? Because I thought I would become a slave and tweet 50 times a day like most people I know do, you know.
And never read another article again.
Yes, but maybe next year, I think I'm going to start next year with a Twitter account and transfer everything that I publish on my Facebook to Twitter. Because sooner or later, I'm going to be expelled from Facebook.
Well, exactly. So they'll do the job for you. You won't be a slave. They'll just kick you off, right?
Exactly. So I was suspended 2 or 3 weeks ago. It was very funny. I sent them a very professional letter, which I assume was read by a human. I said, look, you can blacklist a journalist from Asia Times. Why don't you do the same with a journalist from the New York Times or the Financial Times? So I'm sure that stung a little bit, you know. So a few hours later, my account was back.
Not on Twitter, though. You're talking about Facebook?
Yeah, Facebook.
Yes, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and VK. The problem is I try to bring a lot of people from Facebook to VK, but they don't migrate. It's very complicated to convince people to change social networks.
Another question from chat was what your thoughts are on Epstein and the Maxwells. Takes us a little bit off the election topic, but
Well, I read everything that Whitney Webb published, and I think she got to the heart of it. It's the best stuff that I read about Epstein was what Whitney did. Very, very good. Very, very, really very good. I think the whole mechanism is there. The thing is, obviously, we don't. It's impossible for us to get to the masterminds of the whole story. We have a pretty good idea who they are, but once again, no smoking guns. No? And I'm very curious to what Ghislaine has that nobody knows yet, and what she has, the FBI has, and what they're going to do about it.
Maybe she has something that they don't have, and that's a get out of jail card.
Well, this is what she implied, right?
Yeah.
But for the moment, nothing. She could leak it if she wanted.
But you know damn well that even if she had absolute video evidence of Clinton in bed with a 12-year-old and Trump, that we're never going to hear that. They would protect those people. That class of people never get prosecuted in the United States.
Of course not. Of course, exactly. Of course not. And Joe Biden. We could add Joe Biden to it. You know, it depends on the professionalism involved in this investigations in the Senate or through a special counsel from now on. I don't trust these Republican lawyers at all. I don't know about you, Joe and Liz, but I'm not sure these guys are up to it.
Yeah, but with the evidence has to be made public, and some of it has. The emails have, and the real smoking gun guy, if he is one, is the business partner who.
The business Bobulinski, right?
Yeah, he went on record. That
yes,
that was significant, I think. But the Democratic media totally buried that purposely, just like they did the Burisma story, which was debunked. He kept saying it's been debunked by, but by whom?
By whom? Exactly.
Who investigated it? The press didn't investigate it. Government agencies didn't investigate it. Ukraine didn't investigate it because you fired the guy who was, you put the guy in there who wasn't going to investigate it. Who investigated? How could you say it was debunked? That was it. Okay, it was debunked. Oh, I see. Like you were saying before, especially outside the U.S., they can get away with everything. A coup,
with everything.
And an invasion, a major invasion of a sovereign nation in the Middle East, namely Iraq, killed hundreds of thousands of people, and you don't even have an investigation in the U.S. You get away
Absolutely.
with everything. The CIA operates in a jungle. There is no international law that the U.S. respects. So they can commit any crime they want, from assassination to drug dealing to bribing politicians. And that's what they've been doing since they were created. And where, in what form will they ever be investigated or tried? Never. So
Never.
having that impunity, that money, and that power, I mean, it's
never, because it's the essence of the system. If you don't if there is not a systemic earthquake, nothing's going to happen, and we know it's not going to happen.
Right.
Unfortunately, and the rest of us across the global south, we just suffer the consequences now.
Yeah, you don't even get to vote, but whoever this president is going to affect almost every nation on earth. But even in the U.S., they just drag us along every 4 years, and then they kick us down the stairs once we vote. It's an inter-ruling class dispute. It's a battle between elites. It has nothing to do with even the American people.
Absolutely correct. And now, one of the things that the column that I just wrote before talking to you guys, basically it's a mix of psyops and World Wrestling Federation special, set up as this huge circus, pitting a mob against another mob, with 50% of the country polarized against the other 50%. And you have the guys who run the show in the tribune, just observing from above. It's fascinating, because this is supposed to be post-modernity, post-everything, post-ideology, absolute modernity, that liquid modernity, as Bauman used to say. And this is what we have, something that the Roman Empire was doing 2,000 years ago. It hasn't changed.
Yeah, and you got the media like CNN saying, this is democracy in action. This is
democracy in action. Yeah.
Well, you know what? That's the only part of it that they want to preserve, to make it look like a democracy, that you can vote. That's a very small part. Even if it was a more equitable system in terms of who the candidates are, even in a parliamentary system and there's proportional representation, where small parties can get a couple of seats in parliament, that's just one part of democracy, having elections, right, Pepe? There's so many more things, having a free press, not having monopolies of businesses to control things, having a really independent judiciary. There's a host of things.
No corruption in the system, inbuilt in the system, in all instances of power.
Yes, and
this is democracy.
Economic, more or less, more equality economic than we have in the U.S. That's part of democracy. People who have power because of what they can spend money on. And when you have such a disparity in wealth as we have in the U.S. now, so they can go and vote. I mean, and we know these two candidates were going to pursue pretty much the same foreign policies. Although you're saying Biden might be even a little bit more on the side of the blob, as
sound again, by the way.
Oh,
Interesting discussion to be having while we lose sound, but
check it out.
Yes, this is a discussion. It would
back
be
on.
great to,
Yeah,
it would be
Kathy,
great to have with a panel of top U.S. analysts. I would love to hear their different takes on. Did he could not he go far enough, or he tried and he was nipped in the bud, and the ramifications.
it was an interesting time, Elizabeth, for us to lose our sound. Kathy Bogan, our producer, says that she didn't touch it. It went off by itself, and she put it back on again.
isn't that fascinating?
Didn't touch it. Yeah, like now I don't like to think about this kind of thing at all. I think it's sometimes self-aggrandizing to think the agencies are shutting us down. Yeah, most of us aren't all that important to them.
Tell them we're recording at our end. We've got all the
No.
Yeah, and I'll tell chat that everything will be restored when we repost it, and that Kathy's got that handled. But
Okay, that's what I didn't want to say, because now they know we got it. Now they know we got the tape. Hopefully,
So-
it's your computer. Put it on the.
But you know what's funny though, as for in terms of coincidences, I mean, my internet cut out today in a way that left my provider absolutely stumped. They can't figure out what's wrong with it. So I'm not being conspiratorial. I just thought I'd throw that in there too.
Yeah, but it is funny that we're talking about them, and maybe they shut the sound off. We were talking about them in unflattering ways.
But
Pepe, you there?
Joe and Liz, this happens a lot. I'll give you an example. I do podcasts with an independent Brazilian site that is very, very forceful, unmasking the Brazilian deep state and its connections with the American deep state as well. These guys were hacked every week. And then one day, maybe a month ago, it was so blatant that they identified the IPs, and they were coming straight from the US. They didn't even disguise the IPs, So they were being attacked directly from the matrix, So it happens all the time.
Oof.
Yeah. And obviously they keep an eye on consortium news. Obviously.
Well, I don't know that for certain, but they might.
Guys are doing the right thing. So this is a badge. Take it as a badge of honor, in fact.
Yeah, maybe they'll learn something.
Yes, maybe they'll learn something.
Pepe, we don't want to keep you any longer. We've gone through a lot of things. So
Yes, thank you so much, guys. It was a pleasure talking to you. Really.
Here, Pepe, I loved it. We'll do
Likewise.
it again. And
Thank you, Liz. And let's do it again whenever you want. And no problem.
We will, Pepe. Hopefully someday you'll be able to get on an airplane again, and I come visit you again in Bangkok. Would be great.
Well, I'm so frustrated. I cannot even see my wife. It's ridiculous.
Oh, she's stuck in Paris. Oh my goodness.
Yes, she's stuck in now she's under curfew, stuck in Paris.
Oh, she could be.
It's a nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. Yeah.
All right, Pepe. Thank you.
Okay,
again.
guys. Thank you.
All the best.
Best of luck. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Pepe. That was Pepe Escobar of Asia Times, and if you don't know who he was before that, you know who he is now. So we appreciate Pepe coming on. Again, they haven't called Pennsylvania. They're being, I guess, extraordinarily cautious. There's still 5% to go.
Those results are a little
Trump is ahead by what?
Well, I put those results in about 10 minutes ago. I think there's a new update.
Here's what I'd like to do. I would like to take he's up by 22,576 votes with 95% reporting. That's Trump in Pennsylvania. There's 55% still to count of these mail-in ballots for Biden to make up 32,000 votes. So the way they've been talking about it, it looks like he should be able to do that because he's getting about 60, 70% of all these ballots, these mail-in ballots, and it's in the Philadelphia county where there's been a strong Biden support. Elizabeth, what do you think about us taking a bit of a musical break, and we'll come back in if you can to see?
That sounds fine.
And then we will see if there's an update on Philadelphia because we've been going strong for actually, believe it or not, we've been on the air for 3 hours now. without
Good.
taking a breath, at least, or having a sip of water. So we'll
Maybe
see
makes the
everyone
time
back.
fly.
We'll see everyone back in about 20 minutes or so, and we can break in if there's a big news, like if Joe Biden becomes president or something like that. Okay, see you later. Bye. Okay, we're back here at CN Live's headquarters covering the 2020 US election, which has dragged on for 3 days now. We were told by the not we, but we heard that the Secretary of State of Pennsylvania said that the majority of the votes will be counted by the end of the day, but it is 1 a.m. Friday now on the East Coast of the US, so they clearly didn't do that. There's still 5% of the count to go. We're focused on Pennsylvania because if Biden wins that, he will be declared the winner of the election. With 5% to go, there's like a 30,000 vote difference. Trump is still in the lead, but the trend has been with these mail-in ballots that Biden's getting 60, 70% of those. So it seems in that 5% uncounted seems to be enough space for him to overtake Trump, although he still trails him. He does lead in Arizona and Nevada, still too close to call. If he wins both of those states, he's in as well. That'll give him the 16 votes that he needs. So because nothing has been called and it's quite late now, we're going to sign off for today. We'll be back on the air at 1 p.m. Eastern time on Friday. I think by then there will have been a winner, so you might not get the breaking news here on CN Live, but you're going to get the analysis. We're going to line up a few guests if we can, and certainly Elizabeth and I will chat as we've been doing and discuss it. So I thank everyone for the patience of waiting this last 45 minutes or so, where we decided whether to stay on the air or not, but there's no winner. If there were a winner, we would stay on and chat. We had a great chat with Pepe Escobar, And we enjoyed the third night, and we're going to be back for day 4 of the 2020 election. So until then, good night, Elizabeth.
Good night, Joe. Good night, everyone. Thank you for everyone in the chat who asked questions too.
Exactly. And thank you, Kathy Vogan, our producer, and Pepe. I'm going to sneeze. Okay. Live TV sneeze. And Pepe Escobar, our formerly globetrotting, now lockdown journalist of the Asia Times in Bangkok, who was kind enough to spend about an hour with us going over huge bunch of very interesting issues. We did lose the sound apparently twice, but stay tuned. We will be posting the entire section with Pepe, so you'll be able to hear it again. And he was talking about some really interesting things when we lost sound. Okay. In about an hour, that'll be available on CNN Live's or Consortium News's YouTube channel. So again, for CNN Live, see you tomorrow, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And we may actually have a winner of this goddamn U.S. election. Good night. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
Get out your notebook. There's more.